So we're ready to go whenever you are.
We're ready, Your Worship.
All right, Council, I'd like to call this regular council meeting of February 22nd, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. And I would like to amend it to add item 90.1C to agenda item 15. So if someone want to make that, Councillor Palmer, second by Councillor Charlotte, all in favor, motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes from the regular council meeting of February 8th. Someone write that. Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor. Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes of February 8th? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I'll move that the terms of reference for the Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee be adopted as presented.
Okay. Someone want to make a second? Councillor Charlotte.
To speak to the motion,
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank staff. So there was a lot of staff that helped with this process, including Mr. Simon, Mr. Black, Ms. Donato, Jaylene, and Cindy, and probably a whole bunch of other people in the background. It's a pretty succinct little thing. And then I think we enjoyed getting together with Ms. Donato and putting that together. So I'm really looking forward to working with the council, Charlotte, and getting this turned around.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right. Any other business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we are now going to move on to our public hearing portion of the meeting. And so there is a report, a motion to receive the report. Mr. Simon, do you want to speak to this before I ask for council to put this on the table?
Through your worship, I do have a presentation prepared if council would like to hear a presentation just with a brief summary, but I'm not too sure if that should be coming before or after officially opening the public hearing.
Okay, so let's put this on the table. We'll open the public hearing and then have you do the presentation. Okay? So someone want to make this motion about receiving the report? Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on that? We're just receiving it for information, and then Mr. Simon will go into detail as we enter the public hearing. All in favor of receipt? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to make an opening statement, and then I will ask you to do your presentation, Mr. Simon. So I would like to call this public hearing to order. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representation to council, and all persons present who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaws shall be given the opportunity to address council. By participating in this public hearing, you are consenting to appearing on video and or having audio of your comments recorded, which includes the disclosure of your name and street address. Information that you provide at this meeting is being collected for the purposes of informing council of your interest in property which may be affected by the proposed bylaw, and this information will become part of a permanent public record. Given this, public hearing participants should be careful not to share personal information about themselves or others that could put themselves or others at risk of harm. Finally, should any person not wish to consent to appearing on video or having audio of their comments recorded, you are free to remove yourself from this meeting now. Those of you who wish to speak concerning this proposed bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Please observe the rules. If you have any concerns with the manner in which the hearing is conducted, direct your comments to the chair. Members of council may, if they wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of council members today is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with the individual citizens. Everyone shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one shall be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views heard. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review in a binder located in the Development Services Department, or alternatively forming part of the agenda package for today's meeting, and is accessed under Find Council Documents. Before we begin, may I have the corporate officer confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act?
Yes, Your Worship, all due process was followed.
Great, thank you, Ms. Floyd. A pre-registered speakers list has been established. Each speaker initial presentation will be limited to 3 minutes, provided the comments are relevant to the issues at hand and the hearing is not being obstructed. This initial time limit is to allow everyone a fair opportunity to address council respecting the proposed bylaw amendment. After everyone on the speakers list has spoken once, speakers will be allowed a supplementary 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to new comments only. An opportunity to provide a supplementary presentation is not intended to allow presenters to repeat information from a speaker's initial presentation. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand and the mayor will call upon each of you until all participants have had a chance to speak. After everyone on the speakers list has had the opportunity to speak twice, speakers will be allowed a third 2-minute presentation, which again will be limited to new comments only. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand and the mayor will call upon each of you until all participants have had a chance to speak. So I have a speakers list here. Mr. Simon, you have a presentation. I'm asking you now to make that presentation and then I will go into the speakers list.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure everyone can see the screen. Short-term rental bylaw number 2295.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so this is a brief presentation regarding a summary of bylaw number 2295, which includes zoning amendments to regulate the short-term rental use. So we'll go just quickly over some of the background discussion and then next steps associated with this project. So again, council already passed the resolution, but staff were just recommending that the report be received for information. When we look at some of the previous consideration of kind of how we ultimately got here with respect to short-term rental bylaw, there was a previous bylaw or previous version of bylaw number 2295 that was presented to council. Public hearing was originally held on October 27th, 2021. On November 9th, council had rescinded second reading to bylaw number 2295 and directed staff to go back and do some more work, which was ultimately presented at the December 9th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting. Staff presented council with options and next steps were identified, and direction was ultimately provided to staff at that meeting to regulate short-term rentals spatially. And then on January 25th, 2022, changes to bylaw number 2295 were presented to council and it was read a first and second time as amended. And now here we are at the second public hearing with respect to the most recent version of bylaw number 2295. So one of the key things that's important for the community to understand is what's the current context with short-term rental in the city of Revelstoke. So right now, based on previous approvals that were granted and previous approaches that were undertaken to try and regulate short-term rental within the city, short-term rental is currently permitted in a dispersed area throughout the city. This is due to the fact that comprehensive development zones were granted that ultimately allowed for short-term rental use, as well as spot zoning. So the R1V, R2V, specific zones that were developed to accommodate short-term rental use kind of results in a scattered patchwork of properties that are ultimately permitted short-term rental. When we look at this, about 535 units that are already built or under construction are zoned to accommodate short-term rental. This doesn't mean that we would have that many. It depends on whether or not the owners want to undertake that, but ultimately this is what would currently be approved for short-term rental that's currently built or under construction. While it's highly more variable, the next inevitable question would be, well, how many properties are actually permitted short-term rental, how many units could we have under current zoning allowances. So staff estimate about 1,000 to 3,500 more units could potentially be permitted under current zoning allowances without any changes. There's a few caveats here. It would take quite some time to build that out. It's based on zoning allowances that really haven't come to fruition thus far, highly dependent on developer interest, as many of these CD zones that permit short-term rental allow for a lot of other uses as well. So it's really dependent on what the developer owner interest is of coming with at that time. So this map, and I'll zoom in a little bit. Again, council has seen this before. This kind of shows spatially all the properties that are existing to permit short-term rental. So you can see some of the spot zones that have been permitted, some of the CD zones along the highway, along Townley Street, some of the spot zoning. Powerhouse has an area that short-term rental is permitted. Mackenzie Village is a large property in which short-term rental is permitted, and then as well as the hatched area being Revelstoke Mountain Resort zoning, where short-term rental is permitted in all areas there. So getting into some of the specifics of bylaw number 2295, this is just a basic summary of what the contents of that bylaw is. So existing spot zones, those R1Vs, R2Vs that went through that rezoning process, usually between 2015 and 2016, as well as comprehensive development zones that already have their development rights to permit short-term rental, may continue to operate as long as they get a valid business license. What this bylaw does is look at expanding the area that would permit short-term rental to include some downtown commercial zones, being the C1, C2, C6, which is the central business district, the downtown fringe commercial district, as well as the Victoria Road commercial district, as well as 59 properties shown in the image here that are adjacent to Revelstoke Mountain Resort, as well as Mackenzie Village. So they're kind of sandwiched between Nickel Road, Camosie Road, as well as Hay Road, and they've been identified as being suitable for short-term rental. So the CD zones that permit short-term rental must follow the specific regulations that are contained within that individual CD zone and obtain a business license. So they're going to be bound by the provisions that are contained within their individual zone. The C1 and C6, as well as spot zones, such as R1V, would need to abide by supplementary regulations that are proposed in the zoning bylaw. That would include, it must be undertaken in a single family dwelling, so it wouldn't be permitted in a multifamily or mixed use building downtown, wouldn't be permitted in the newly acceptable now garden or carriage suites, so that detached second dwelling unit that is now permitted on a property. It must provide 24/7 property management services from a permanent resident or a group that is, or an organization business that is here permanently. It can't be undertaken in conjunction with a hostel, bed and breakfast, or group home use. Maximum of 4 sleeping units with 8 occupants. Must not detract from the form and character of that existing single family dwelling or create a nuisance for surrounding properties, odor, noise, parking, things of that nature. The short-term rental wouldn't be permitted any signage, must obtain a business license, and must provide 1 parking stall per unit. Now, for properties that are zone C2, as well as those expanded properties.
Before you carry on, Mr. Simon, Councillor Elliott has a question regarding your statement here. Councillor Elliott.
Just on the permanent resident must provide 24-hour property management service for a permanent resident. Does the permanent resident have to be in this particular house, this being short-term rental?
No, they would just need to be a permanent resident of the city or a business that is located within Revelstoke.
That's great. That's kind of misunderstanding what I had in the past. I thought when I say that the owner of the property had to be in the home. But if that's the way we're going, I'm in favor of it.
So
that's fine. We're just going to hear his report. Thank you.
Yeah, and through your worship, and that's a good segue. So just to be clear, these are the regulations that would apply to the C1 being the central business district, the main downtown zoning, the C6 being the Victoria Road commercial district, and those existing spot zone properties. When we start looking at the C2, so that downtown fringe commercial, as well as these proposed expansion properties that are sandwiched between Mackenzie Village, the resort along Hay Road there, the regulations would be a little bit different for those. And these are the ones where it's only permitted in a single family dwelling that contains a legal secondary suite. It must be operated by an on-site permanent resident operator who lives in either the single family dwelling or the legal secondary suite. It's not permitted in a garden suite or carriage suite. Again, not permitted to be undertaken in conjunction with a hostel, B&B, or group home use. Maximum of 4 sleeping units with 8 occupants. Can't detract from the character of the single family dwelling or create a nuisance. Not permitted in any signage, must obtain a business license and provide 1 parking stall per sleeping unit. So you can see that these properties that are more purely residential or more residential in character, such as the C2 or these properties along Hay Road, the key difference for them compared with the C1, C6, and previously spot zone properties would be that they need to have that permanent resident on-site operator, either living in a suite or living in the main part of the dwelling while the other portion gets rented out. And whereas in the C1, C6, and spot zone properties, they need to have 24/7 property management services.
Okay.
So,
Clear, Councillor?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, thank you. Mr. Simon, carry on, please.
So the next question that would come from this is, well, under these changes, how many short-term rentals could we potentially anticipate? So when we do an estimate of the number of single-family dwellings that are in these commercial zones, as well as the addition of the 59 properties, and then staff have also included the Thomas Brook community in here because there was a recent OCP amendment that ultimately set the stage for those properties to be suitable to be used for short-term rental tourist accommodation style uses. We look at about 680. So about 145 additional short-term rental units could potentially be accommodated under this proposed change. Now, that's assuming that all of them would be able to meet the regulations, which obviously not all owners would have a desire to operate a short-term rental, and not all properties would be suitable to actually meet the regulations. But in theory, that's the maximum amount that could potentially be expanded under this change. And this is just, again, a brief map that now shows the zoned properties C1, C2, C6 in the downtown area, as well as the additional 59 properties along Hay Road. So this would show someone where all properties that are permitted to have short-term rental are located. So what's the outcome of this? It allows for a measure and manage approach to allowances for new areas to permit short-term rental with monitoring for the expansion area. We can actually see in real time how this permanent resident on-site operator approach is working before we look at expanding it any further and before we determine if that is the right course of action. Allows for more effective preservation of permanent resident neighborhoods where there's the expectation that there's certain areas in the city that will just be off limit to short-term rentals. In expansion areas, owners get to keep autonomy to rent either the suite or the main dwelling, potentially keeping suites as more affordable accommodation. The original idea of a cap did pose some administrative challenges, regarding the logistics of fairness and aspect of administering a cap. And then also with the amendments to 2295, there's been a simplification of language to try and make the bylaw a little bit more accessible and user-friendly for those that would be reviewing it. So some other considerations that aren't necessarily included in bylaw 2295, but will be looked at in the future. Amendments to the municipal ticketing information bylaw, business licensing bylaws required, public education campaign, and then based on direction from council at the January 25th meeting, a report will be brought back for enforcement strategies for further direction. Again, just reiterating the Thomas Brook community, there was a previous OCP amendment that also allowed them to undertake short-term rental uses with a rezoning application. We have 11 spot zoning applications that are on hold, pending the outcome of the short-term rental amendments. These applicants would be provided a full refund or would be able to proceed through the spot zoning process at their ultimate prerogative. And then lastly, there would be a council policy that staff are going to be proposing because there's a lot of moving parts to the short-term rental strategy. And this policy will help with clarification as well as interpretation and guide enforcement and reporting back to council. So the next steps after the public hearings closed and should third reading of the bylaw be granted, staff will bring forward amendments to the other supporting bylaws, being the municipal ticket information, fees and charges, business licensing bylaw, so that they can all get caught up to third reading. All 4 regulatory bylaws along with a council policy would be brought back for council consideration of adoption. Staff would reach out to applicants with spot zoning applications on hold, inform them of their options to either get a refund or to proceed through to council. Staff would also prepare materials, information sheets, webpage updates to make sure that there is clarity in the public realm regarding what the regulations for short-term rental are. And then we would pursue an education campaign. So that concludes my presentation. And yeah, happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Before we go into the public speaking, is there any questions of Mr. Simon? Seeing none, Mr. Simon, we're going to start the public process. So I have a speakers list. So Mr. Morrison, first on my list is Mrs. Cindy Holder. She wishes to speak, so could you bring her in, please? Cindy, if you're there, you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to give council a benefit of your thoughts. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Cindy. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Cindy Holdner. I live at 1650 Prail Road, Revelstoke. Okay. My husband and I were both born and raised here in Revelstoke, like our fathers before us. We've worked in this community for 40 plus years with one pension. We didn't think that after retirement that we'd have to go back to work to pay for all these increases, the taxes, insurance, food, etc. Hydro, just like everyone. God, I didn't think I'd be like my grandparents or my parents, but here I am. I can't imagine how some of these elderly locals are on one pension and how they're doing with all these increases. We've seen a lot of changes over the years, and I think change is good. However, we feel that there is no financial gain for us, as stated. We need this income of a short-term rental to keep our home. We have kids, or when our kids have children, they will be the 5th generation of Revelstokians. We pray that we can stay and help raise our grandchildren and not have to sell. Nothing saddens us more than thinking that we can't afford our house any longer and have to sell it, like a lot of the locals who have moved away. This is our home. We need this short-term rental. We do agree that each short-term rental should have proper parking so vehicles are not on city roads. But after that, this is our home and we feel that we are being let down by council. If they vote on the number of amendments that are considering to be put forward, we hope that you'd make the right decision. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate your comments. Speaker number 2, Hannah Kinsley.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Hannah.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to speak against the proposed amendments to the to 2295. Basically, we're a young family in Revelstoke, and we rely on the income that we have from a short-term rental. I think that you're taking away from the families like us that can basically, you know, we can supplement our income by the short-term rental. We've both lived in town for over 10 years now. Yeah, I think you're making it really difficult for young families to be able to stay here and live here. Yeah, I just think it's quite unfair the way that you're proposing to change it. From the 2021 public survey, there was a lot of support for restricting short-term rentals to single-family homes with secondary suites. And I don't see why you can't kind of enforce that across town so that the homeowners have to live in their homes while they're renting out to short-term renters. Yeah, I just feel like it's quite unfair. And then a lot of people are gonna be put out because of it. I think that everyone should have to abide by the same rules. And most of the problems that have come up are because there's not been anyone to enforce the rules. But I don't see why short-term rentals can't be a good thing for people in the city. If they're spread around the city and everyone's sticking to the rules, then yeah, I just don't see it being a problem. And I think that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate your comment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Fletcher, Eileen Fletcher. State your name and address, please, for the record.
Hello.
Go ahead, please. State your name and address for the record.
Eileen Fletcher, 415 Mackenzie Avenue. I support this latest version of the short-term rentals bylaw. Specifically, I support the proposal to allow short-term rentals in single-family dwellings in the C2 zone, provided a permanent resident is living in the home. The C2 zone is a mixed-use zone that is primarily residential in character and use. In our residential area, there are several short-term rentals where the owner lives in the home and operates the vacation rental. This kind of short-term rental makes a positive contribution to the neighborhood and improves housing affordability. I am, however, concerned about the recent recommendation from the Advisory Planning Commission that property managers be allowed to operate short-term rentals in lieu of resident operators. Near us, there are several short-term rentals operated by property management companies. There is a noticeable negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood from properties managed by these companies. Landscaping becomes bedraggled, parking interferes with pedestrians, and there are noisy late-night parties. None of these issues have arisen at short-term rentals where the owner lives in the home and operates the rental. We appreciate the revisions made to this bylaw in response to the concerns of residents in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Moving on, Chris Kelly.
Your worship, I don't have Chris Kelly online.
Okay, so we'll go on to Taylor McFadden.
Hey, good afternoon. Taylor McFadden here. Good afternoon, your worship, members of council, and other stakeholders. I own a property at 1837 Hay Road in Revelstoke, and I am in support of the changes to the bylaw for 2295 and the amendments to 2318. I think we all know that there's been a lot of growth here in the last number of years, and supporting growth in the community is certainly something that brings people to town to support businesses, to continue to enjoy this wonderful area that we are lucky enough to own a property in. It's obviously become out of reach for a lot of people to own here, given the pricing, but I think what we should be continuing to do is support accommodation for people wanting to come and visit town. I know a number of people that I've spoken with in the last few years that have decided to skip out on coming to Revelstoke in its entirety, given the fact that they spend 6 or 8 months in advance trying to book accommodations that they cannot find. And having that much of an issue trying to find somewhere to stay causes them to go elsewhere. And they bring that money to Golden, to Lake Louise, different areas where they can find accommodation. And they're not supporting our local businesses here. So I think that's something that we need to continue to push to support people traveling here to visit. And it only makes sense as we continue to grow as a community. Given where I'm located on Hay Road, where, there's Mackenzie Village right behind us. There's a number of single residences that have got short-term zoning in the past. It only makes sense being close to the resort, being close to the Cabot Golf Course that's coming in, and the increased amount of people in the Mackenzie Village area where there's going to be expanded commercial presence, to have a spot where they can come and stay on a short-term basis. Certainly in support of the growth and development and change in Revelstoke, but one thing that I would mention is that, of course, with any short-term accommodation, it needs to be managed properly. I think that residents should have the choice. If they want to manage it, then that's great. If a property management company that's local in town wants to manage the property for someone, then that is also a good thing. There's someone that's going to be in town to assist and be able to help out in situations when, say, the property owner is away, or if someone has a designate who's going to be in town if they're out of town, then I think any of those three options is fine. So I think it's certainly up to the property owner to decide how they want to manage it, but they have to make sure that they have someone there to, take care of issues if they arise. So again, I'm in support and just want to thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Your comments, Taylor? Appreciate it.
Can I ask a question? So the bylaw we're forwarding at this point doesn't allow property managers to assume responsibility for those spots outside of the C2 and C1 zones. Is that right?
Clarification, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, the short-term rental operator needs to reside on site. If that operator, the one who's taking responsibility for the short-term rental business operation, wants to secure the services of another third party to come in and help with cleaning, that's perfectly fine. But we need that designated operator who's going to be the one that we can contact should there be an issue to be residing on site.
So I just want to make sure people are supporting the bylaw that's in place. We're talking about the same thing, because this gentleman just was on the line, was in favor of the law, but he's also in favor of property management firms to take responsibility. And I just want, so
he's giving us the benefit of his thoughts on it.
Yes.
And that's what we're here to listen to. Thank you. All right, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Simon. So we're going to go on. Kyle McFadden. Right, Kyle? You're muted.
Hey guys, are you able to hear me now?
We are, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle McFadden, owner of 1837 Hay Road, Revelstoke. Your worship, mayor, council, and members of the public. I wanted to voice my opinion and record for the bylaw 2295 and bylaw 2318 in support of these changes. I have been coming to Revelstoke for, since 2009, and three of my brothers have obtained employment locally in the city. One common theme that everyone found was the lack of availability of short-term and long-term rental units during everyone's time here. And I think that this change is very proactive. It will move the city in the right direction, and it'll be an immediate economic growth on the area. So I wanted to go on record today and voice my opinion in support of this change. So I support bylaw 2295 and 2318. Thank you for hearing my opinion, and I appreciate your time today.
Great, thank you again, Kyle. Appreciate your time. Let's move on. Tony Jaglin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Tony, go ahead, please.
Tony Jaglin, 1650 Griffiths Road. Kudos to council and staff once again. Just like last time, this is a thoughtful and nuanced policy, but we're in a housing crisis and this is not the time for nuance. Categorically, I want 0 Airbnbs at this time. Instead, the objective should be a vacancy rate. Most urban areas have a vacancy rate. It's the percentage of rental units that are available on the market, and we don't have that unless a vacancy rate can be calculated in a negative number. The market for rentals is so tight in Revelstoke that you need to know a landlord in order to get a place to rent, and even that is not a guarantee. Someday, maybe demand will be lower than supply. Maybe someday we can, we'll have a discernible vacancy rate, and at that time, we could re-examine this. But for right now, we need long-term housing, long-term rentals, much more than we need short-term rentals. Every level of government is trying to figure out how to fix the housing crisis. Even the provincial government today released their budget, and they're trying, but still nothing solid has been presented, nothing concrete that is going to fix this. But right in front of you is a bylaw that could help make housing more affordable in Revelstoke. Opening up 59 more houses to short-term rentals is not going to help the price of housing in Revelstoke. So I want 0 Airbnbs at this time, but I wish to clarify that I would be fine with a bed and breakfast if a homeowner wishes to derive more income from their home. And thank you for this time.
Great, thank you for your comments, Tony. Emily Revel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Emily.
Hello, Mayor Gary Sulz, city staff, and the community of Revelstoke. My name is Emily Revel, and I'm the owner and operator of Stay Revy Vacation Rentals at 3401 Cathwood Road. I manage a number of properties in the Revelstoke area. I'm speaking today in regards to the proposed short-term rental bylaw number 2295. I believe all homeowners in Revelstoke should be given an equal opportunity to decide how to manage their own property, whether it's through short-term rentals, long-term rentals, B&Bs, or nothing. It should be the freedom of the homeowner to decide. So I asked today why it should be on the homeowners of Revelstoke to fix the long-term housing crisis that is happening not just in Revelstoke, but province-wide. Why are we not turning to the businesses that hire the staff or the developers that should have created staff housing a long time ago? Instead, you are putting the burden on the people of Revelstoke and asking them to take on all the potential risks of long-term housing. As we know, BC is a tenant-based province, and the BC Tenancy Act makes it very difficult for landlords to make any adjustments once someone is living in their home. This does not make it very appealing for homeowners to want to long-term rent. Short-term rentals have allowed many families to be able to afford and build a life in Revelstoke. I believe in any residential area that has an owner or permanent resident on site should be allowed to short-term rent a section of their home. This will allow a space for the long-term renters and homeowners to be able to make some passive income to support their families. I understand that homeowners, if this bylaw is passed, many homeowners, if this bylaw is passed, will have to put their houses up for sale. With the increase in prices, I do not believe these properties are going to be sold as affordable long-term housing that meets our community needs. The next item I would like to mention is in regards to C2 zoning. I believe along with C1 and C6, it too should allow that short-term rentals with no permanent resident on site, but with a 24/7 property management company. In the downtown core, there are a number of boutique hotels, bed and breakfasts, bars, hostels, and nightclubs. I think that the C2 zone should be allowed to also benefit from this tourism in this area. I understand that the decision the council makes today will determine how a lot of community members make ends meet and afford to live and nurture their families in this community. I urge you to consider this when making your decisions today. As mentioned, I believe it should be up to the freedom of the homeowner to decide what to do with their property, and the emphasis of long-term housing should be turned towards businesses and developers. I urge you as our council to seriously read the letters that are being sent from our residents of Revelstoke, our families that reside here, and our people that make this town. Stand up for what is fair and equal opportunity for all residents of Revelstoke. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emily. Much appreciated. Marty Schaefer.
Your worship, Marty was here. However, I don't see him on the list now.
Okay, we'll carry on, and if he comes back, we can bring him back on. Let's move on to Peter Nielsen.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Peter Nielsen here. I'm at 403 7th Street East in Revelstoke. Thank you for allowing me a little time to speak to you. Just as I'm also the chair of the Revelstoke Accommodation Association, and did send a letter on behalf of our membership. Hopefully you got a chance to read it. I did want to come and be on record to state that I am in favor of both the changes that are on the table today. It addresses the housing crisis that we're currently in, and allow, or at least I think, create some more long-term rentals in the short term, and potentially in the long term. It also addresses the issue of neighborhood preservation, which I think is a real issue for many. Short-term rentals in an uncontrolled fashion have disturbed the neighborhood in a way that many residents aren't, definitely aren't in favor of. I think by limiting it to the areas that are described in the bylaw, it does give some control of the experience It's for those coming to rent in Revelstoke. And make no mistake, there's a lot of demand for this style of accommodation, and not having short-term rentals, we'd be non-competitive with other resort destinations, because that style of accommodation is quite desirable for many folks. But by putting it in the correct areas, it'll I think help with the experience for those folks. So, and I think the areas outlined make sense near the resort, near downtown. That's really where I think, in my opinion, the visitor wants to be when they visit Revelstoke. And I think from an accommodator's perspective, this provides some confidence that there will be some sort of control on just how many units are in the marketplace, and that the experience again will be preserved from that perspective. And I think the opportunity, there's a lot of potential bed units allotted within the resort zone. So not only at the resort, but at the Mackenzie Village zone that will more than amply provide enough vacation rentals as we grow as a destination. And make no mistake, I think we will continue to see growth. Revelstoke is a branded destination in the marketplace. I think worldwide is only growing. People are catching on to what we have here, and they'll continue to want to visit. And I think this is a well thought out process well thought out bylaws to address all these concerns.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Nielsen.
My pleasure.
Moving on, Tim Stapenhurst.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. I've sent a letter to the councilors. I hope you all had a chance to receive it. I just want to be on the record for saying that I'm not in favor of this bylaw. I'm going to echo what Emily Revelle said. I don't think this is equitable. I don't think this is fair for all the citizens. I think we're creating some major disparity between the neighborhoods, and yeah. I urge you guys to go back to the table, revise 2295, follow your guiding principles, and review this even further. That's all I have.
Great, thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
So, Mr. Morrison, go back to a couple speakers that weren't on the line to see if they're there now. Chris Kelly, has he joined us?
No, he is not.
Okay, and we'll go back to Marty Schaefer. Has he joined us?
He has not come back in yet.
All right, so I am going to call for a second time for people to speak, and they'll be able to give us their opinion for a second time. And as long as they're giving something new, we'll allow them to speak. And they'll be allowed to speak for a supplementary 2 minutes. So I will go back to the start of our list. Cindy Holder, would you like to speak a second time, giving us information supplementary to your first comments? Seeing none, we're going to move on to Hannah Kinsey. Would you like to give us any supplementary comments secondary to your first time speaking? 2 minutes. I will move on. Eileen Fletcher, would you like to give us any further comment supplementary to your original comment? 2 minutes.
Hello, I believe Bruce was on the speakers list, but hasn't had.
I have him on the speakers list for public hearing 2318, and we are not there yet. We are still on public hearing 2295. Does he wish to go on this speakers list?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay, so Bruce, give us the your address, please, and your full name.
Bruce David Allen, and I live at 415 Mackenzie. I just wanted to
Go ahead
say,
with your comments.
sorry?
Go ahead with your comments.
I just wanted to say that I support the changes that council has come up with. I think it's a good. I appreciate that you've listened to the residents of the C2 zone and changed it so that people have to live in their short-term rental to have a short-term rental. I think that's important for the neighborhoods. There's more control and more ability to contact people when this goes on. So I support the amendments. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the benefit of your input. All right, so we will go back to Taylor McFadden. Taylor, any secondary comments?
Nothing new at this time. Thanks.
Great. Kyle McFadden, any secondary comments?
Yes, sir. My name's Kyle McFadden, 1837 Hay Road, Revelstoke. I want to go on record saying I agree 100% with Emily Revel and being proactive to economic growth of our beautiful town, and basically allowing homeowners the opportunity to end up renting out any suite at any area in the town. I think that was an excellent point she made, and I fully support that as well, and support 2295 and 2318. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Tony Jaglin? Emily Revel, do you want to speak a second time?
Nothing new right now. Thank you.
Okay. Peter Nielsen?
I'm fine for now, thank you.
Okay. Tim Stapenhurst, do you want to speak a second time? Bruce Allen, do you want to speak a second time?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right, I am going to call for a third time. And is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? So the third time, people have spoke before. Any further comments? Cindy Floyd, go ahead, Cindy.
Sorry, Your Worship. We do have another person on the line that would like to speak. She joined the meeting a little bit late, Shannon McLean.
Okay, so we will hear from Shannon if you're there. Go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, give us your name and civic address, please.
Shannon McLean, 2076 Mountain Gate Road.
Thank you.
So I'd like to speak to the zoning proposal for short-term rentals. I have a letter written here. So part of Revelstoke's allure is that it's small town, lively, and has an entrepreneurial feel. Many love that we have no big box stores here. Most people don't move here for work, they move here and then make it work. Tourists love being able to stay at local Airbnbs where they can connect with their whole family and get local recommendations on where to take their business and spend their vacation money. This experience and these values are at odds with this proposal. It does not take an astute observer to look at the color-coded short-term rental zoning proposal and see that you are literally rolling out the red carpet for mega corporate interests while ousting opportunity for the average Revelstoke citizen trying to make it work. We see a proposal for short-term rental allowance right at RMR where bare land costs well over $1 million. We see a zoning area directly across from the imminent Cabot Ridge Golf Course, a franchised, expansive luxury resort containing many hotel rooms. Do we see an allowance for nightly rentals near our existing, locally run, well-loved golf course? No, we do not. We see zoning for nightly rentals in the hotel district, commercial spaces downtown, and along the highway. We see short-term rental zoning at Mackenzie Village, which, let's not forget, was proposed as affordable long-term housing during its planning stages. Spoiler alert, the vast majority of those units are now nightly rentals. It's very clear who Revelstoke City Council is catering to here. Big business, resorts, ultra-wealthy landowners, and hoteliers. To propose this as a philanthropic solution to a long-term rental crisis would be laughable if it wasn't at once shameful hypocrisy. With this proposal, one should not be surprised to see more hotel chains popping up along the highway in the coming years, where guests will stay and go without even reaching Revelstoke's downtown core. With a short-term rental 2 kilometers from RMR, one would think we would be considered resort fringe. More than a dozen in my neighborhood have expressed the desire for short-term rental allowance and continuation. At our rental, where we live on site, families reunite, frequent RMR, local shops and restaurants, then leave with memories, bags full of local goods, and plans for their return. Will they pick a new resort town if this proposal goes through? One where they can rent an Airbnb together, make lifelong memories, and help local businesses thrive? Thank you for your deliberation.
Thank you for your comment. Appreciate that, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, so we are at the end of my speakers list. So we have no one new in waiting. Is that correct, Mr. Morrison?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So for the third time, I will ask, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representation? So just indicate to Mr. Morrison if you'd like to speak one last time, giving us a different perspective on your thoughts. Council, I see no one else willing to speak. We have called 3 times for speakers to speak. And so seeing that there's no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you for your submissions. Please note that no further comments, either written or verbal, can be received once this meeting has been closed. I'll now call for a motion to close this public hearing on short-term rentals. So I want to make that motion. Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. All right, we're going to be going on to the second public hearing for bylaw number 2318. And Council, are you prepared to go right into this, or do you need a brief recess? Okay, so we're going to go into this. And so there is a motion on the table. Then I will read the public hearing information, and then we will get Mr. Simon to make the presentation. Someone want to make this motion that's on the table, 5B, please. Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. You want to read the motion? Or are you okay with just in the package?
As presented.
As presented, thank you. All those in favor? Motion's carried. So actually, Mr. Simon, I'll get you to do the presentation, and then I will read the speakers.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just want to make sure again that everyone can see the screen here and that there's no technical issues.
Good, thank you.
This presentation has to do with corresponding bylaw for short-term rentals that again is looking at zoning bylaw amendments. So this would be short-term rental bylaw number 2318. So Council, you already went over the recommendation from staff. It's just that this report be received for information purposes. So I just want to delve right into what the contents of this bylaw are. So this bylaw was crafted to help improve clarity and language that is used throughout the zoning bylaw. So what's ultimately happened over the last decade or so with new comprehensive development zones, spot zoning applications, is that we have a mishmash of regulations, conditions of use, definitions, all revolving around short-term rental, and it creates confusion not only for staff to administer and interpret the bylaws, but for council and the community at large to really understand where these uses are ultimately permitted. So the intent of this bylaw really is housekeeping, clean up existing language that's scattered throughout the bylaw without changing development rights. So what this includes is looking at some uses that we have and consolidating those into one standard use. So that would be hotel, motor hotel, motel, lodge. That would all be wrapped up into this new definition that would just be called tourist accommodation. And you can see on the screen how that's proposed to be defined. One or more buildings containing one or more habitable rooms or dwelling units used to provide temporary accommodation for the traveling public, may include associated commercial uses, secondary commercial uses, and it includes hotels, motels, lodges, motor hotels, guest cabins. The intent here again is to clean up language and ensure that there's not going to be any interpretation issues where a motel is different than a hotel where the same standards and regulations would typically apply. All references to vacation rental would be removed and replaced with short-term rental. So again, improving clarity so that we don't have all these different uses flying around in the bylaw that essentially mean the same thing. Within comprehensive development zones that have vacation rental definitions that are embedded within, these would be removed and then redrafted into conditions of use. So what essentially happened in the past is you would have these comprehensive development zones that would have their own definition of vacation rental, and vacation rental within that definition would have regulations embedded into it, which makes for challenging administration and interpretation. So these would be pulled out, they would be reframed into a condition of use framework so that it's very, very clear. You're in a CD zone, the use of short-term rental. You'll see a section at the end of the CD zone that says short-term rental regulations. Those are the regulations that you need to abide by. So you'll also see that we have a lot of different names for short-term rental that are currently scattered throughout the bylaw. So we're looking at removing those names and ultimately replacing them with short-term rental so that, again, it's very, very clear, not ambiguous as to what we're talking about when we're describing short-term rental. So recreational commercial accommodation, again, that's a use that's in one of the comprehensive development zones. The definition will be eliminated, replaced with short-term rental. All the regulations that were contained within that use and definition would be redrafted into a condition of use framework. Transient public accommodation and different variations thereof. Again, this would be taken out and redrafted as a short-term rental, and any of the regulations that were embedded within those uses or definitions, again, same thing, redrafted into a conditions of use framework. Then we look at some of the other tourist accommodation associated uses, bed and breakfast, hostel. There wouldn't be any changes to these. So a bed and breakfast is still intended to provide for rental of full bedrooms in a single family dwelling with a permanent resident on site, use of common space, and serving of breakfast. Hostel, again, no changes, intended to provide for rental of dormitory units within a single family dwelling, again, with that permanent resident on-site operator, use of common space. And one of the other changes specifically within the downtown zones being the C1, C2, C6, which is Central Business District, Downtown Fringe Commercial, and Victoria Road Commercial. There's been confusion as to whether or not multifamily and mixed-use buildings in those zones are permitted to have short-term rental accommodation. So we've proposed conditions of use to clarify that these are not intended to be short-term rental buildings. Condo buildings, they were never built as hotels. They're not intended to be run as hotels. They're intended to provide residency for permanent residents. So we've just included conditions of use that are ultimately clarifying this so that it helps with administration and interpretation of the bylaw. So what's the outcome of this? Cleans up language without impacting development rights. It reduces the overall amount of tourist related uses we have from 9 down to 4. And what this ultimately means is providing temporary accommodation to visitors in a residential or mixed use building would either be classified as short-term rental, hostel, or bed and breakfast. Providing temporary accommodation in commercial oriented buildings becomes tourist accommodation. hotels, motels, lodges, things of that nature. This really does improve the planning framework for administration. Temporary accommodation is required to abide by the applicable conditions of use within a specified zone, such as a comprehensive development zone, or by the supplementary conditions of the zoning bylaw, rather than scattered throughout the bylaw and embedded in definitions, embedded in uses. This really does help kind of clean up the zoning bylaw. So that concludes my presentation. And again, the recommendation from staff is just that the report be received for information. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Did I call a question on receiving? Thank you. All right, so we're going to go into the public portion. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representations to council, and all persons present who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given the opportunity to address council. By participating in this public hearing, you are consenting to appearing on video and/or having audio of your comments recorded, which includes the disclosure of your name and street address. Information that you provide at this meeting is being collected for the purpose of informing council of your interest in property which may be affected by the proposed bylaw, and this information will become a permanent public record. Given this, public hearing participants should be careful not to share personal information about themselves or others that could put themselves or others at risk of harm. Finally, should any person not wish to consent to appearing on video or having audio of their comments recorded, you're free to remove yourself from this meeting now. Those of you who wish to speak concerning this bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Please observe the rules, and if you have any concerns with the manner in which the hearing is conducted, direct your comments to the chair. Members of council may, if they wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of council members today is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Everyone shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views heard. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review in a binder located in the Development Services Department, or alternatively, forming part of the agenda package for today's meeting and accessed under Find Council Documents. Before we begin, may I have the corporate officer confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act?
Yes, Your Worship, all due process was followed.
Thank you, Ms. Floyd. A pre-registered speakers list has been established. Each speaker's initial presentation will be limited to 3 minutes, provided the comments are relevant to the issues at hand and the hearing is not being obstructed. This initial time limit is to allow everyone a fair opportunity to address council respecting the proposed bylaw amendment. After everyone on the speakers list has spoken once, speakers will be allowed a supplementary 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to new comments only. An opportunity to provide a supplementary presentation is not intended to allow presenters to repeat information from a speaker's initial presentation. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand, and the mayor will call upon each of you until all participants have had a chance to speak. After everyone on the speakers list had the opportunity to speak twice, speakers will be allowed a third 2-minute presentation, which again will be limited to new comments only. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your hand, and the mayor will call upon each of you until all participants have had a chance to speak. So on my speakers list for bylaw zoning amendment 2318, we will start with Irene Parsons. Irene, are you online?
I'm online. Hello.
Could you give us your name and your civic address, and then you can commence speaking? Thank you.
Thank you. Irene Parsons, 511 Mackenzie Avenue, Mayor's Council and citizens of Revelstoke. I am opposed to the tourist accommodation proposal, including hotels in the C2 zone, as hotels may contain licensed beverage facilities. As a city in the neighborhood, we need to think carefully about what types of businesses should be welcomed into our primarily residential area. In this primarily residential area, we are already exposed to noise, mischief in wee hours when licensed beverage facilities close, and we live in close proximity to downtown. We do not want to exasperate the situation by having bars and lounges right next to our backyards. Parents of children playing in residential areas should not have to worry about them encountering bar and lounge clientele at varying degrees of intoxication right next to their backyard. The C2 zone is already stretched thin in regards to lack of parking, especially in the winter. I am not aware of any parking available in the C2 zone for this proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Parsons. Bruce Allen.
Yeah, start again.
Thank you for hearing me. I'm Bruce Allen. I live at 415 Mackenzie Avenue. In regards to bylaw 2318, I am opposed to allowing hotels as an acceptable use of structures in our neighborhood classed as C2. This is not a mere housekeeping or cleaning or clarification of the present bylaws. The definition of a hotel includes the ability to have a bar or lounge. As the majority of the residents of our neighborhood outlined in our letter to the council opposing whole home short-term rentals, we want to keep our neighborhood as a residential neighborhood. Recently, people have bought homes in our neighborhood, in our area, with the intent of raising their families there. One of the experiences that frightened our daughter when she was young were the loud drunks passing our house in the early morning hours on their way home from the bars. Those disturbances continue. I wish that no family, I wish that on no family. There is no reason to single out our residential neighborhood as an area for hotels, which will allow more bars. It's not uncommon for the bars in the commercial area of the downtown to play loud music and loud parties that disturb the peace and enjoyment of our homes. We do not need more of the same. So please revisit this bylaw and exclude hotels from the C2 zone. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Allen. Eileen Fletcher.
Hello. Eileen Fletcher, 415 Mackenzie Avenue as well. I strongly object to adding tourist accommodation to the principal uses in the C2 zone as proposed in this bylaw. The tourist accommodation use, as you've already heard, includes hotels with licensed beverage facilities. Currently, hotels are not permitted in the C2 zone. Revelstoke zoning bylaw allows hotels to have licensed beverage facilities like bars and lounges with a liquor primary license. This kind of liquor license is not currently allowed in our area. Allowing hotels in the C2 zone under the umbrella of tourist accommodation will also allow liquor primary licensing in our neighborhood. The C2 zone is primarily residential with some commercial uses. In the OCP, we are designated neighborhood mixed use. The OCP recommends hotel uses in the central business district, not in our mixed use area. The purpose of the C2 zone is compatible commercial and residential uses, not downtown commercial uses. For decades, this zone was called residential with commercial uses. The city's new interactive map shows our neighborhood in the central Revelstoke residential district, not the central business district. None of the city's planning documents support adding hotels and licensed beverage facilities to our neighborhood. I understand the concept of a consolidated tourist accommodation use is based on Whistler's zoning bylaw. However, there are major differences between our bylaw and Whistler's. In our bylaw, licensed beverage facilities are a fundamental right within the definition of hotels, but not in Whistler's. Our bylaw does not have minimum requirements for hotels. Whistler's bylaw has a clear framework of sizes and uses for all types of accommodation, including hotels. Whistler's bylaw requires at least 2/3 of a hotel to be accommodation. If this bylaw passes, ours would only require 1 or 2 habitable rooms. Also, we have few enforcement tools. Whistler requires a good neighbor contract for liquor primary licenses with serious consequences for noise and disruption. Revelstoke doesn't have the regulatory or enforcement tools to control the impact of hotels with bars and lounges on our neighborhood. In my written submission, I have included excerpts of the various zoning bylaws that clearly show licensed beverage facilities in hotels will be permitted in the C2 zone if this bylaw proceeds. Liquor primary licenses are not compatible with the residential uses in the C2 zone. I don't support this bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Moving on, Taylor McFadden. Taylor, you have any comments regarding zoning amendment bylaw 2318?
Hey there, good afternoon. Taylor McFadden, 1837 Hay Road, Revelstoke. Majority of my comments were directed at 2295, but in terms of 2318, I certainly am in support from what I had read. It makes a lot of sense to kind of clarify the different zones and make, I guess, it a little bit easier to interpret. So I'm in support as proposed, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Great, thank you for the benefit of your comments. Kyle McFadden.
Good afternoon again. Kyle McFadden, 1837 Hay Road, Revelstoke. This is in relation to bylaw 2318. I want to voice my approval to the changes. And with this approval, you'll see immediate economic growth and securing more job opportunities for local and seasonal residents. As a community, we should take proactive measures to ensure long-term growth, jobs, and you will end up creating immediate impacts in those sectors. I wanted to end up voicing my opinion today and go on record for being in approval for bylaw 2318. Thank you for your time and consideration this afternoon.
Great, thank you for your comments, Kyle. Emily Revel. Emily, would you like to make comment on bylaw 2318?
Just happy with bylaw 2318. I'm in approval of it. I think clarity and cleanup of terminology is great, and I'm happy to see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. Peter Nielsen.
Thanks, Your Worship and council members. Most of my comments were definitely directed towards the other bylaw, but I do see the logic behind this and would voice my support for it.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your comments. Tim Stapenhurst.
None at this time, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I am going to call for supplementary speakers unless, Mr. Morrison, we have anyone who is online that has not had a chance to speak. No further new comments from people, Mr. Morrison?
No, Your Worship. I've got nobody with hands raised.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the speakers list. Ms. Parsons, any further comment?
No further comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce, Ellen, any further comment?
No further comments, Your Honor.
Eileen Fletcher, any further comment?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, please. 2 minutes.
I just, Eileen Fletcher, 415 Mackenzie. I'd just briefly like to comment on how information was provided to the public about this bylaw. As you're aware, my concern is specifically with reference to hotels in the C2 zone. However, this change is also impacting the residential areas between Mountain View School and the old court and the courthouse, where you have C5 and C6 zones embedded in those residential areas. I am a bit concerned about the fact that this information was provided some time ago to a group called the Monthly Developers Meeting, which I don't believe is a committee or commission of council. And yet for us as residents of the community, the only way we could find out about this was to take a deep dive into some very technical documents right before a council meeting. I think that that is a bit unfair to us and as residents, and I think it is also lacking in transparency. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Moving on to Taylor McFadden. Any secondary comments, Taylor?
No further comments at this time. Thanks.
Great. Kyle McFadden, any further comments?
I do not have any further comments at this time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Emily Revel, any further comments?
No further comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Nielsen, going back to you, any further comments?
No further comments. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great. Tim Stavenhurst, any further comments? Seeing none, as we have gone through everyone twice, I will call for the third time. Is there any further comments from anyone who would like to speak? There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you very much for your submissions. Please note that no further comments, either written or verbal, can be received once this meeting has been closed. I'll now call for a motion to close the public hearing. Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. We are now closing this public hearing. And before we move on to our other items on the agenda, is someone willing to make a motion just for a brief recess? So Councillor Ryan, Councillor Brooks Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. So Ms. Rousseau, we're going to take a brief recess and be back shortly. we're ready to resume. Great, thank you. So item 5C, there is a motion. Someone want to put that on the table and then we can have a discussion. Councilor Brooks Hill.
The official community plan amendment bylaw number 2286 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Palmer. Anyone wish to start off the discussion? This is where we had a public hearing, 1160 Newlands Road. I think the concerns we heard from the residents up there, they were concerned about safety, both walking along Newlands Road to Airport Way and then Airport Way, I think, to the school. Any comments, Mr. Simon?
Nothing further from staff. Our position is outlined in the detailed staff report.
Okay. Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So I seconded the motion and I'm in favor of the OCP amendment bylaw. The other bylaw, the zoning, which we'll be talking about briefly, I will not be in support of that. But this, as far as the OCP, the uses there, I think that's not where the controversy is, and I think that's an appropriate use of the OCP.
Okay. Any further comment on the OCP?
Yeah, same. I was just looking at my notes. I think 2287 is the one that deals with zoning, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, no comments about it.
Okay, so I'll call a question on 2286. All in favor? Motion's carried. Someone want to put item C2 on, and then we can have a discussion on that, please. Councilor Ryan.
The zoning amendment bylaw number 2287 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. So, Councilor Ryan, do you want to start off with comments?
No.
Okay, Councilor Palmer.
Sure. It's Newlands Road. There's the part that was rezoned before and was done separately from this. And I'm not sure the history behind that. I think it's unfortunate, but also unfortunate is we sometimes can't fix things that have happened in the past. I just think how that was developed with that little strip in the center. Am I confused?
Perhaps Mr. Simon can correct me. I don't think it was rezoned. It was just subdivided.
Okay. Okay. Fair point.
Mr. Simon, comment on that, please.
Through your worship, that is correct. The whole property was R1, and then they severed off the 25 lots under the R1 provisions. And then now they were looking for an OCP amendment and rezoning or zoning change on that remainder parcel.
So for clarity through the chair, it was, and again, this isn't necessarily applicable to the bylaw, but it's just more understanding. So was this portion subdivided at that same time and that road created at the same time?
Through your worship, I just want to confirm you're talking about the internal roadway. It's called Williams Gate Lane.
Yes.
Yes, it was created. So essentially what happened is 26 lots, 25 of those being R1 single family, one large remainder lot, which is the subject of this OCP amendment rezoning application bylaws, and then dedication of the internal roadway was all provided with that phase 1 subdivision application.
Okay, so just for clarity, that was all happened at the same time.
Correct.
With the subdivision, it created the remainder lot, which is the subject of the bylaws before council deliberation today.
Yeah, so that's basically my point, council, is that I think that was an error for whatever reason, and I don't need to find out why particularly. I think that was pointed out in the public hearing. So we have what we have on this parcel, which is currently zoned for R1. Maybe I'll just confirm that through to the plan.
Go ahead, yes. Mr. Simon, confirmation, please.
Through your worship, that is correct. It is currently zoned R1.
And so the question is, do we go from R1 to a comprehensive development zone? And I'm not supportive for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm opposed to this CD zone. I think if we should have appropriate zoning, this is not in my mind, it's not a comprehensive development. It's row housing, a little bit of mixed use, perhaps with the duplexes and stuff, but it doesn't warrant that. And so it's another CD zone that we're creating where there's other zoning mechanisms that are already in play. The second part is, I think some of the motivation from the developer is for increased density. However, the increased density proposed in here, although it is a little bit more, is not significantly more than what would be permitted with R1, with the recent changes with carriage houses and garden suites being permitted. So essentially there's 2 units on each one of those parcels if it was kept to the zoning, R1 zoning. Furthermore, pretty much everyone of the residents in that area were opposed to this change to a comprehensive development zone, and they had expressed a whole variety of reasons. Even without the changes, there's going to, a lot of those things are going to happen. Some of the concerns that they have about it, increased traffic and all the various things will still be there with the residential zone, the R1. However, that is what's already been permitted in the zoning. So that's basically, I'm opposed to the CD zone, and I don't think that it's unduly hindering the developer from creating new units, new lots in the area. If there's something better than the CD zone, they can certainly come back with that, but I'm opposed to the R1 zone. I think that's my comments.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from councilors?
Can I ask a question on this?
Yeah.
So just on terms of affordability, you're buying a townhome or a smaller fourplex. Under the option you're considering is you build a home and then you add a carriage home as well. So the significance there is it costs you more to build a single home and a carriage home. If we're talking affordability in our town, which is a better option? Right? I mean, a townhome versus adding all this other stuff that you're proposing. A laneway house, it's a major cost. I mean, the lots there are $300,000 or $400,000 a piece. So squeezing as much density as we can on those particular lots seems to be the route we're going. We're encouraged. We've asked the planners to pursue on every front. Let's get affordability moved in a better direction rather than the way it's going. So I have trouble with the single lot, with adding more onto it, because that's a burden that a single homeowner has to carry. And I think a smaller building is what we need.
Okay, thank you for your comment. So, Mr. Simon, just for clarity on the size of the proposed lots for this, if they sold them as R1 versus a comprehensive zone, is there the ability, are these lots big enough, because they made the lot smaller to start with, are they big enough for garden suites?
Through your worship, that would have to be determined through site planning considerations. So the minimum lot size would be 550 square meters. Generally speaking, that's the minimum lot size of the R1 zone, sorry to specify. Generally speaking, that should be sufficient to accommodate a dwelling as well as a garden suite or carriage suite. But again, that would be, dependent on each lot specific characteristics, right? And whether or not it's suitable for that form of development. But generally speaking, the site's pretty flat. If they meet the provisions of the R1 zone for minimum lot size, they should be able to accommodate garden suites or carriage suites. There are other considerations such as access that would need to be determined as part of that. But yeah, I'm confident that it would be able to support that development form.
Okay, and I just want to go back just for clarity. So the R1 zoned lots in this neighborhood, are they 550 square meters or were they smaller? Something's ringing a bell with me like 375 square meters. That's why I'm asking.
Through your worship, no, all the R1 lots that were subdivided as part of phase 1 are 550 square meters minimum.
All right, thank you for that. Councilor Round.
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact date, but back in the day, the proponent held a meeting for residents to attend. And I I was curious what the information was about this second phase, because if my memory serves me, which it often doesn't, but it was mostly about the subdivision and the general idea, but there wasn't very much specifics around this is going to be row housing and this is going to be single family. I mean, there definitely was some information that it was already zoned R1, so that wasn't a big component of it, but I don't remember there being much focus on what the details would look like of that second piece. And then there was also something about sewer connectivity. Yeah, so do you have any information on that?
Mr. Simon?
Yeah, so through your worship, I'm just looking at the summary of the open house that was held. It was November 29th, 2019. There were 28 attendees. There was a lot of discussion about the environmental measures with the subdivision, gauge resident interest and potential sewer expansion, determine preferred sidewalk configuration, and then the other key piece was gather community input on the preferred phase 2 land use. The responses from the community were supportive of single family for phase 2, comparable to phase 1. A couple other things, the property has the OCP land use designation of future growth, which is why they're looking to change it right now to support the rezoning. The future growth properties are intended to look at infill mixed use development to support the city's housing needs, which is why you're seeing the proposal put forward in this way for phase 2.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering what the purpose of having an open house is if you're not going to necessarily listen to some of the feedback, but I guess they had other information that they got from that than just phase 2. Is that what I'm hearing?
Through your worship, I'm not sure, is that if that's something you guys want me to respond to?
There was more than just the intent of the open house wasn't to sort of get a green light from residents. They also were getting input on other components of the development. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, through your worship, there was a variety of items that appeared to be presented at that open house. I wasn't actually in attendance, but I've read through the summary, and it looks like it was to cover off a multitude of factors. In terms of incorporating feedback from the public, that is obviously an important component for any development proposal, but we also need to be cognizant of who's attending the open houses. Are they residents in the neighborhood that don't want to see a potential change? And from the planning side, it's really important that when we're reviewing applications and making recommendations to council, we're looking at it through that public interest lens. And public interest isn't always going to equate with, the desires of the immediate local neighborhood.
That makes sense. I just have another question about the sewer. So there was comments there about how trees would have to be removed. And I just wanted clarification because I'm not sure I understand that piece. So is this if the remaining homes wanted to be tied into the sewer that's already there, they would have to remove some trees from the existing park?
Mr. Simon, any comment regarding that? I think, Mr. Black, you're on here, so we're going to talk about all things that flow downhill. So we'll let you speak to that.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Council, to Councillor Ryan. The future, when this project came forward, we ensured that the wet well, there's a lift station located at this project site, that wet well was located and deep enough so that we could, in the future, hook up all of Lower Arrow Heights from Airport to Lee Road to Nickel, all the way to the river, so that we can get all of those folks off of the septic system. Right now, I believe that the future may require us to go through the city park land, which is the current forested area with trails through it, but I'm not 100% confident in that because we haven't done the final engineering. So at this point in time, there may be a pipe through that parkland. It is not contingent upon this second phase of the Williamsgate project. It may be required in the future to connect the rest of the homes to the sewer system.
Okay, thanks.
All right, great. Any other comments from councilors? Councilor Brooksville.
So I'm a little torn about this one. I understand the general community's need for more density, more affordability. Single family homes are less affordable, I would say, than a duplex or a triplex or a row house. On the other hand, we didn't have a single positive comment from anyone at the public hearing. And so I think back to some of the other decisions that we've made. I'd like to imagine that we're being consistent and there's at least some consistency, so people who are applying and residents can say, when X proposal comes up, well, council has done this before, so it will be treated in the same way. So I've been thinking about the Hay Road development, which there was a lot of public opposition to, but council passed. However, there was a lot of positive feedback as well at that public hearing, which is different. And in that proposal, there's also a certain number of units that were going to be for rental housing, guaranteed for, is it 10 years? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this proposal is different in that sense. We received no positive public feedback. There's no rental housing. So to me, you know, as much as we'll see more density, there's some public benefit. I see less public benefit in that sense. I would really like to see this not just become R1 lots. I'm not convinced that the CD zone is as well thought out, perhaps, as the Hay Road property. I see parking being an issue. There's only one parking spot per unit, I believe. Is that two?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, the parking requirements of the zoning bylaw would dictate 2 per unit, and that is what the applicant has demonstrated to be feasible, so it would be 2.
Okay. So I'm a little torn because I don't want to just vote against this and see it go to R1 lots, but at the same time, I would like to see more.
Okay, so there is a way that we could do this. I mean, we could basically strike down this zoning amendment bylaw and then go back to the staff putting something on. Let's say we were comfortable with just duplexes on these lots. So now we don't have townhouses or row houses. We now have duplexes on these. So we're now dropping down the density, but we're still allowing some density on that. And so I'm going to go to Mr. Simon for confirmation on my thoughts on that, if you don't mind, please.
Through your worship, if there is going to be recommended changes that impact the zoning in the final development form, so if council says, you know, we want to see duplexes on these lots rather than row houses and duplexes or potential fourplexes, I would note a couple things. So the OCP land use designation that they have proposed to go to, this walk-up residential, it is envisioned to be supporting moderate density development with row house, fourplex, triplex development. If council approves that OCP amendment and then changes the zoning to be duplexes, we now have a conflict between that OCP land use designation and the zoning. So there would need to be a change to that OCP land use designation from walk-up residential to duplex residential, something of that nature, to support the zoning to go to, a CD zone or an R2 zone that would ultimately accommodate duplex development.
Okay, thank you for that comment. So Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, so in the proposal, it does show that subzone A and subzone B both allow for row houses. So even though there's some talk of mixed use, I think it's worth mentioning that in theory it could all become row housing. And I echo lots of the comments that Councilor Brooks Hill said, that in general, I do really like density, and I don't like, it would seem like a shame to make this just R1. But if there was an option, like you were mentioning, even if it required us to change the OCP land use designation, I think it's worth doing. And one other suggestion, there was some discussion about underground parking, but how that would be expensive. But it sounds like the quote that we were given, I think it was 60,000 per spot. If it was all row housing, seems like it would be a little steep. And also these aren't going to be necessarily the most affordable, which is the word that we all throw around but really can't define, in the first place. So really, what's an extra $40,000 or $50,000 for that entire unit? If it's going to make the place even more desirable, some people, maybe it's seniors or whoever who's moving in there, that might be a desirable aspect. So if we could do that, it would reduce the burden on the neighborhood, but still give us that density. So I think that's one interesting option, but I don't know how if we could even like put that into the requirements, that or doing something, as you were mentioning, Your Worship, where we just slightly take down it. Maybe it's just triplexes and fourplexes kind of thing.
Yeah, so when we think about underground parking, these are going to be individual deeded lots. So pretty hard to build one underground parking spot and make it affordable. We would have to do the entire complex. Then it becomes a strata and it doesn't become individual type things, right?
Gotcha.
So then we are definitely looking at higher density no matter what.
Right.
Whether it's row houses, apartments, or whatever the case may be. So
is there an issue with strata? Like, does the proponent have an issue with the strata?
Well, that's a whole different thing. And so I'm not going to get into that right now. I'll get Mr. Simon to weigh in. So what we have in front of us is a proposal for denser building of property out there. What we heard from those who spoke in the community, and so those who spoke were opposed. Those who didn't speak were probably okay with it because they didn't come out and speak. Having said that, so there was a couple things that the residents there were concerned. So almost all of the residents, one resident lived directly across from where the proposal is, the other lived beyond, okay, around the corner and beyond. Their concern was about safety and about parking, congestion, and then wear and tear on the roads. And so only a resident in the neighborhood could feel that. We wouldn't feel it where we live because it's not our neighborhood. Now, having gone through all of the cars in the community driving past my house for the entire time the roundabout was being built, we went from nobody driving past our house to everyone in town driving past our house. I get their concerns, I understand that. However, for me, it was the best thing for me to understand as mayor to see the density and that sort of thing. I'm not quite as concerned as the residents in the area, but I'm not looking at it. So I look at it and say, I'd like to see higher density in every neighborhood. So when we do infill, even in my neighborhood, if one or two of the houses in my neighborhood got sold and they said, you know what, we're going to put a small apartment building or whatever on there, I would be going like, okay, bonus. We're going to see different kinds of things come to our neighborhood, which is going to make our neighborhood our neighborhood. So those are the things that I like to bring up. However, having heard from some of the people saying safety, we want our kids to have a sidewalk, we're concerned about snow removal, that sort of thing. And knowing in the future that we're actually going to have another roundabout, we believe on Nickel Road, where these people would be able to come out their driveway from Williamsgate, turn right onto Elm, turn left onto Nickel, and now they're going straight out to a roundabout to get out. Is that not correct, Mr. Simon? Is that kind of our intention for the future?
Through your worship, I would defer to Director Black on that matter.
Sorry, I forgot you were the dead, Mr. Black. I'm not looking at my computer. I just see Mr. Simon on the screen. Go ahead.
Through your worship, you are absolutely correct, sir. That is the plan for the intersection at Airport and Nickel is a future roundabout.
Okay. So I'm understanding of what these people are saying, but I'm also understanding of how things will change, and they're not going to be that number of vehicles going straight from this development up Newlands Road to Airport Way, which has already got a fair amount of hospital traffic on it. But there's a stop sign there. So it's a long delay waiting for that stop sign. And I can attest to that because I go to the hospital in my business on a regular basis. And so in Revelstoke, waiting 5 minutes or 7 minutes is an eternity for traffic to go. And then you're paying attention to the whole thing. So I understand what the community there is saying. My biggest concern is safety. So we have a plan for a walking trail along Airport Way. Is that correct, Mr. Black? And then connecting up to the school at Arrow Heights.
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay. So I'm less concerned about safety and now more concerned about, can we make this work density-wise for the community? So we've got 26 or 25 lots that are single family in this area. We're going to take the same quantity and we're going to actually make it a little denser for people. And being in a spot where it's costing a little more to buy a lot, this might bring the price down for people and make it more affordable. But as Councillor Ryan's saying, what's affordable? And so we can't determine that. So my question to all of you, are you comfortable with that sort of thing? Or are we saying, no, not to this development and we need to make alternative suggestions for the proponent? So any comments from Councillor Palmer and Councillor Chalette?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So just curiosity for the viewing public. I don't know if this is live or not, but to note that none of the council debate is on the screen. I don't know what the public says.
It says live streaming is live here.
Okay, so they see Paul or do they see us?
So it's a good question. So can the council chambers be seen versus just Mr. Simon, Mr. Morrison?
Your worship, yes, they can.
Okay.
Council chambers can.
Okay,
good. Thank you for that. All right.
So a couple comments. First of all, this is a question about whether we rezone from R1 to comprehensive development zone, and that I'm opposed to. Noting things about density, I mean, we've talked about that, affordability. Those are important questions, but they're not the only consideration. So there's multiple factors here. I am also a little bit concerned on fairness for the developer. They originally had first and second reading back almost a year ago, April 27th, 2021. So it's taken a long time. And note the October 12th report, there was a subsequent report. I don't quite recall that, and the link doesn't seem to be working, but so it's this other question, and I don't think it's really for us to figure out for the developer a better way to create density. I think there is better ways that take in consideration the community. And so from my perspective, it's saying the CD, it doesn't work from my perspective. And there's other details when I look at the visualization, even for the other areas that were subdivided on the other side, they're going to be facing basically the backs of all of these condos. And I just
they won't be facing the back, they'll be facing the front, because that my understanding is that you'll be driving into your driveway to your garage, and then there's no exit out the other side. So are they not facing their front living room or whatever, facing towards the Williamsgate Lane, or are they facing towards Newlands Road? Just some clarification, or is that defined at this point, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, so vehicular access would need to be from Williamsgate Lane. And then there could be, pedestrian access with a little walkway out onto Newlands Road, but all vehicular access would be restricted onto onto Newlands. So the way that the renderings show it right now, and keep in mind these are conceptual renderings, is with kind of the buildings oriented towards Newlands Road, but then at the rear of the property facing Williamsgate Lane, there would be potential detached garages that would be connected via party wall with a potential little half-story loft above those garages as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. You are correct, Councillor Palmer. Thank you for that.
So to me, it's weighing that out, and I don't want to belabor the points too much. I think my position is clear, and I support what I heard at the public hearing, and it makes sense to me. There might be something better, really, if we reject this. That's up to the developer where they go, from my perspective. At the same time, I think we're moving a lot, we're getting a lot better on how we are working with developers, so there's much more timely answers to the questions they have. I think that's outstanding. So there's that little factor that's in the back, but when I weigh everything out, that's why I'm saying, no, I don't think this is the right thing. And in that visual component, and just for clarity, so this lot fronts onto Newlands.
Through your worship, yes, that's correct, but no vehicular access from Newlands.
Correct. So when you get to setbacks, the setback requirements and all that kind of stuff starts to come in. So that it feels like the 1980s Surrey tiny little subdivision, or these, where you had the row houses squeezed into lots. That's the feel that I get from it. And then the concerns on the walkability going through there just doesn't make sense. But I think I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. I really think either council as a whole, maybe we support the comprehensive development zone, and if not, then the developer can decide where he's going to take it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your comments. So, any other comments from other council? Councillor Sherlock, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one, I wanted to bring up, there was a really good article in Municipal World talking about this. Missing middle housing has been a huge topic for a long time. We've been talking about it around this table for years. Going to the OCP public engagement session that talked about growth scenarios, this was exactly what we're talking about. What does it look like to increase density in residential neighborhoods that are typically single-family homes? I understand some of the concerns that my fellow councillors have expressed. I actually agree with quite a few of them. I don't like the idea of doing CD zones around the community. I would rather have residential zones that fit this concept of middle housing, the missing middle housing. If this is something we want to see in our community, what does that look like as a regular zone rather than a comprehensive development zone that adds complexity? On the other hand, I also appreciate that this started a long time ago, before we were this far along in that conversation. So it's part of a process. Small shifts on a regular basis and we will get somewhere. I agree with Councillor Elliott on the fact that the way we've set up the existing zoning, I don't know that we're quite there yet to make this kind of development possible. So I agree with the concern around higher costs around accessory dwelling units like carriage homes and garden suites. I think you're right in that sense. Like this would suit the mix of housing affordability that we need to hit. And yes, affordability is a very weird term right now. It's moving a lot. But that missing middle concept, how I understand it, is that it's that range that we need to build. And if all we're seeing built are large single family homes that are quite expensive, we're not having that mix that would help give median middle incomes a place to live. And we are seeing quite a few people with middle incomes moving into our community. We saw that in the growth reports. It's something we need to plan for and we need to move forward with. I do have some concerns around the transportation and transportation considerations. So when we're talking about parking, and especially how that relates to snow storage, I definitely have concerns with the idea of packing snow onto these lots as well as dwelling units. Tandem parking spots, which I believe is what we're seeing, are in the plans, don't work as well as they're supposed to be, in my experience.
So I kind of agree with Councillor Brooks Hill. I'm a little bit torn on this one. Like, I want to approve it. I want to see us move forward with this. I want us to take responsibility for that work, to do these master plans and to show that we can develop the sidewalks and the transit system that is going to serve a growing community out by our hospital that should be served better. That seems responsible to me. But that being said, like, I'm leaning more towards supporting it just so that we can move forward. I think there's been a lot of great work put into this comprehensive development zone. And I think that the community has expressed desire to see this kind of development. We just can't put our fingers on where.
I agree. And so from my perspective, in having conversation with staff about this, townhouses, so for a guy like me who's getting to the age where I may want to retire, maybe sell my home and have a townhouse where I could go to and basically smaller unit, that sort of thing, close to the hospital. But also when I think about those coming into our community who may be able to have a family, so whether it's an RCMP officer or a nurse or a doctor or whatever, close to that sort of thing, close to work is walkable. You know, you're already talking about transit. How do we make that work better? Those sorts of things. And the fact that there's going to be some changing in the roadways. When I look at this sort of thing, I think this is a positive for the neighborhood. However, it's not what everyone in the neighborhood wants to see. And I kind of get that. I understand that from their perspective as well. So, you know, are we all torn? I think we are. I mean, Councillor Palmer's made it quite clear it's not the way that he feels we should go. But I need you to tell me what you feel. And so is there any further comments from any of you before I ask the question? Councillor Elliott.
So if this was zoned R3, would it fit the development?
Mr. Simon, do you have an answer for that?
Through your worship, I think there's a few things that I can point to in terms of like the technical details of the CD zone that might help paint the picture for council in terms of, you know, what tools you guys have available to you at this stage to see something come to fruition, but still be responsive to some of the feedback that you've heard that I've heard you guys discussing about. So to answer Councillor Elliott's question, we did try and work with the developer to say, hey, is there any way we can make the R3 or the R4 zone work? And to be fully, you know, truly blunt about it, our R3 and R4 zones are quite broken. They do not support the development form that we need. They are further eroded because single family dwellings are included in there. So if you rezone to R3, you can still pursue single family dwelling development, which completely erodes the intent of the medium and high density residential zones. Those zones also don't allow for, you know, detached garages that are joined by party walls, which is what's proposed with this development concept. So something that's a little bit new to Revelstoke, but very common in other communities, and helps provide for covered parking in a way that's a little bit more affordable, as opposed to building separate detached garages for every lot. So it would have been quite a challenge, and it would require substantial amendments to the R3 zone to make that work. This is on staff's radar. We most definitely are aware of the changes that are needed, and we want to look at the residential zones comprehensively. But if through your worship, if I may, there's a few things here that also might help out. I do have a brief rendering pulled up that kind of shows how the rear of these dwellings would, you know, interface with the single family dwellings. So if that's helpful, I can point that out. You know, the CD zone itself, you know, we kind of touched upon the necessity for it because the R3, R4 zones are quite challenging to work with right now. But one of the other things is, you know, council with a CD zone, it does give you a lot of control right now. So when I'm looking through the specifics of the CD zone, you know, if council only wanted to see duplexes on the outskirts and then row houses on the inside of the units, that's quite a simple change to the CD zone that, in my view, from a planning perspective, would still be in line with that walk-up residential land use. One of the other things too, right now, when you look at the CD zone for the row houses that are intended to be centrally located, the maximum number of row houses is 8. It would be very easy, you know, we envision between 6 and 8 row houses would go in there per lot. There'd be 2 row house lots, and council could change that to 6. So those are 2 technical details right off the bat that would get you down to a maximum of 28 units on the proposed development. So there are options by going a CD zone route where council does have quite a bit of control. And I completely agree as well from a planning perspective. We definitely want to reduce our reliance on comprehensive development zones. We're just not there yet in terms of our zoning bylaw. Somewhere where we need to get to. Yesterday would have been not soon enough, but we definitely acknowledge that. So again, I have the rendering pulled up if that's something council wants to see. And again, there are other mechanisms that you guys have to kind of control those technical details within the CD zone.
Sure, if you can show us the rendering, Mr. Simon, that would be good.
So through your worship, you can see here kind of the lower picture that the garages would be attached via party wall for both the row houses and the duplex or fourplex development, and that they would be offset. So you can see even for the single family houses, all their driveways would be coming off the interior road. They'd be looking across to driveways that are coming across the interior road to kind of mirror that image. And then the aesthetics from Newlands Road would still be reflective of the existing context of the surrounding community.
Okay, Councilor Palmer has a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Sulz. So this is the point.
You can go up there.
Yeah. So one of the issues, aside from all the stuff that the public said at the public hearing, these houses all along there, looking at this, what I call this Surrey style, that. And so a question to the planner is, we have this tool of the CD to make this better, but we're here at, potentially third reading. What opportunities are there at this late stage without creating, really undue delays to the developer? One of the things, before you answer that, one of the things that I see as a real benefit on the CD zone is this connectivity that goes across to the hospital, that pathway. So I think that's awesome. But to me, this, all that stuff about pedestrian safety and all that kind of thing, and that's why
way of concern.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Simon, do you care to answer that? Councillor Ryan, did you have a question before we?
Not a question, but more of a comment. Like when we look at that, and if it's like the aesthetic that you're concerned about, or like, is this the best use of that? I know that I brought up underground parking, but if truly the goal is to create diversity of housing and have more density, then why wouldn't we be like looking at that approach? Because it gives more allows for more green space, more density, fewer parking concerns, fewer snow removal concerns, overall just a higher quality development. That's all.
Any comments, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, most definitely underground parking is always a great amenity. You typically see it with apartment buildings where the density is going to, prove to be cost effective to provide that underground parking. It definitely has a direct impact on housing affordability. I can't imagine that the developer has done a pro forma analysis based on underground parking for this type of development, which, for all intents and purposes, really is still on that low density development scheme, maybe starting to get into medium, but really not really. It's because it's all ground oriented development. It's very, very challenging to make underground parking cost effective at this scale and with this development form. That's why you typically do see it with apartment and mixed use style buildings.
Great. All right, Councillor Charlotte, comment.
One comment and then a question. So one comment on the rendering that we were shown there, where the driveway access is all on the interior road.
Right.
My recollection of that was to keep the traffic access off the main drag right in front of the hospital, really for safety reasons. There have to be access somewhere. So I don't think that I have any concerns in that sense. I do have a question. When you were talking about changing the maximum number of row houses and having some flexibility there, the rendering you showed 2 blocks of 6 each. Were you talking about 2 blocks, the 2 blocks of 6 each, or because you were mentioning the max is 8?
You were thinking about cutting, Mr. Simon, some options for us, I guess, on how we get this forward, and then maybe altering the inside sort
Yeah,
of
if you
thing.
could just show us on the rendering, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So through your worships, I can pull that rendering back up. That was presented in the April 27th council report. So yeah, you can see what's envisioned for the row houses. You know, they would be about 6 to 8 units per block. But should council have concerns with that, it's quite an easy fix in the CD zone to make that change from a maximum of 8 to a maximum of 6. And then same thing with the duplexes on the outskirts. Right now, there's a few different dwelling types that are permitted on the periphery of the development to integrate with the neighborhood. If council deemed it appropriate to only allow duplexes, in my mind, with that mix of housing, it would still likely be appropriate under that walk-up residential OCP land use. So again, those are changes that council can most definitely provide direction on if they deem it to be appropriate.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask for some, do you have anything further, Councilor?
No, that's fine.
I'm just going to ask for some guidance on how we get there, should this be an appetite for this council. If we pass the zoning amendment bylaw being read a third time, can we do a subsequent motion to change the CD zone so it comes up with some of the suggestions that you're doing, or what? How do we get there?
Through your worship, and I would want to confirm with the corporate services group, but in my view, the most appropriate avenue forward would be to direct the changes that you want to see. And it sounds like they might be a little bit technical, and we would want to review the CD zone to make sure that everything still aligns and meshes, and then it could be brought back for third reading as amended, should that be the appropriate path. And I see Ms. Floyd is on here.
All right, thanks, Ms. Floyd. I appreciate that. So my question to you, we have a motion on the table. We want to be able to, we may want to bring this back. How do we get there, Ms. Floyd, from where we're at now?
Your worship, I agree with Mr. Simon that it would be best to probably rescind the motion that's on the table to give it third reading, or defer it until a following meeting so that it can be read a third time as amended.
All right. So who is the mover and the seconder on that? Jackie and Nicole. And so would you be interested in rescinding that motion?
Yes.
And so, what's that?
Yeah, from being on the table.
Yeah, on the table. Yeah. So we can basically rescind it while it's still on the table, correct?
You can table it, you can refer it, they can withdraw it if you wish.
Okay.
If the mover wishes to withdraw the motion.
We just want to talk about it another time with some amendments.
Yeah.
Whatever the procedural way to do that is.
Okay. So Ms. Floyd, if we withdraw this motion, and then we can talk to Mr. Simon as to making some amendments to this and then bringing it back, is that correct? Do we need to make a motion to, so let's rescind first or withdraw?
Sorry, your motion, your worship, I used the wrong word. It shouldn't be rescinded because the motion you haven't called the question, but withdrawn is appropriate.
Okay.
So Nicole could just withdraw the motion at the seconder.
The seconder that can withdraw it?
Nicole is the seconder.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Jackie can withdraw.
Sure, withdraw.
Okay, so she's going to withdraw that third reading. So now my question is, if we want Mr. Simon to work on some sort of amendments, how do we do that? Do we do that now around this table, or do we do that? He's shaking his head yes. So Mr. Simon, go ahead and weigh in.
Through your worship, and again, want to make sure that corporate services is okay with this as well. But there are specific sections within the CD zone that you could direct staff to review. So for instance, if subzone A, which is the ones on the periphery of the lot, that right now would be envisioned as duplexes or fourplexes. If council wanted to pass a resolution to direct staff to remove certain uses from that zone so that only 2-family dwellings are permitted, we could reference the appropriate section for you to help craft that resolution. That's within the bylaw. And then the second one would potentially be looking at amendments to restrict the maximum number of row housing dwelling units per lot to 6. if that's something that council chose to do. So we can direct the appropriate sections, and if council did want to pass something else to say any other amendments as necessary to make sure that those changes are integrated into the CD zone, just in case there are little tweaks and technical changes that do need to occur. Again, I would look to our corporate services to ensure that that's suitable.
So Councillor Ryan, did you want to say something before I go to Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so my recommendation would be to remove row houses from subzone A and get rid of subzone B altogether, because subzone A seems to, if it allows for two-family dwellings, multifamilies, so triplexes and fourplexes, then that gives, if they were all fourplexes, for example, like similar density without as much of an impact. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, so I just want to go back. So when we were talking about subsection A, I'll get to you in a minute, Councillor Palmer. We were talking about the outside periphery. So that on the outside, we could set up as duplexes, correct? And then the other section with the row houses, we could do something with that, but that is, what section is that? So let's deal with the first section on the outside, which I think is what Councillor Ryan.
Subzone A, yeah.
Subzone A. And so that's set up now without a drawing in front of me that has duplexes and fourplexes.
Yes, right here.
Okay, thank you for that. Two-family dwellings, dwelling multifamily triplex or fourplex. Okay, so if we were to amend that to have duplexes only, is that doable? Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, yes, that would be correct. And should it be helpful, I do have the CD zone bylaw up here if council would like me to share my screen with that.
Sure, you can. And then Councillor Palmer, before we go any further, I know you want to weigh in. So Councillor Palmer wants to weigh in before we put any motion on the table.
So Mayor Sulz, actually, I was, because it seems that we're getting down into the weeds at this point.
Yeah, of course.
So what I was going to propose as a motion that zoning amendment bylaw number 2287 be referred back to the planner to work with the developer on potential options for amending the bylaw.
Will that work for you, Mr. Simon? Is that kind of an overarching better approach?
Through your worship, the preference would be to understand what those options are. We don't want to be interpreting what we think council had heard at the public hearing and then in turn what council might want to see with changes. If the changes really are related to keep it two-family dwellings on the outskirts, less row houses on the inside, then that's quite a simple change that I can go back to the developer, that staff can go back to the developer and work on. But it would be preferable to get that direction rather than leaving it open-ended.
Okay. So, Councillor Elliott, comment?
Just on the renderings that were presented, those are just concepts. We're just, involved here is just the lots. He's not developing.
Correct. He's not
according to this plan. So if you're getting focused on what it looks like, we're going the wrong direction, because that's not the ultimate ending look. I mean, he could do a fourplex on the corner or a duplex at this stage, according to that. So how it meshes together is not clear at this point. It's just to say, in principle, we want more density than an R1 lot. And that's all we're getting to right now. We have the courage to say, it's bucking what the neighborhood wants. It's just the courage to say, this is what we as a community need. And that's the decision we had to face. Now, if we have the courage to do that, we'll take some flack. But ultimately, we can, it's a decision that needs to be made.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't got to that yet, so I know we need to do a motion. So do you have a comment before we make a motion?
I'll just make a motion.
Okay.
And then we can talk.
Okay.
Subject to staff accepting the parameters, but to limit the outer lots in the CD zone to a triplex, so eliminating the fourplex, and the inner lots limiting the row houses to 6 as opposed to 8, and any other smaller technical changes required to make that happen.
Councillor Sherwood.
Question. So are you proposing to remove the fourplex from the use, permitted uses on subzone A? Or limit it to only, because it's,
Just eliminating the fourplex, so
and not row, but leaving the row houses in for the edges? Because right now, row houses and fourplex and triplex are allowed. So what was discussed was
okay, so yeah,
removing the row houses and removing the triplex or fourplex. So you're suggesting leave in triplex, but remove fourplex or remove row house.
yes, yes.
Clarifying, I will second.
Okay, so clarifying that. So is that clear? So I have a mover and a seconder. Is that clear to you, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, that would be clear to me, and I would look to Ms. Floyd to make sure that they have the information they need to have that proper resolution.
So yes, your worship, the resolution that we have would be that CD 21 be amended, subzone A of CD 21 be amended for the outer lots to be limited or to exclude fourplex and row houses, and that the inner, the subzone B be amended to limit the row houses to 6.
Okay, Councillor Ryan and Councillor Charlotte, you have.
Yeah, just one comment. You mentioned the outer units, but just to be super clear, that's subzone A, so not just the 2 units on either side, it would be all of subzone A.
Okay, is that clear, Ms. Floyd, subzone A?
It is, yes, your worship.
Okay, Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, your worship, to speak to this motion and why I would second it. I think this helps mitigate some of the concerns the neighbors had. I've heard from several of the commenters that if the density wasn't quite that high, they would be more amenable.
Right.
But there were still concerns. So I still feel strongly that we are taking on responsibility, like Councillor Elliott says. Someone needs to sit with this tough decision. But with that comes the responsibility to make sure that our master transportation plan incorporates transit and sidewalks and roundabouts and access points for the safety of both the new residents and the existing residents.
Okay. Any other comments from councillors with the motion that's on the table? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Sort of sounds like this will probably pass, but I'll be opposed to it because I think it's just time diluting of what was already there and isn't addressing some of the core issues. I suspect Councillor Elliott, I'd like to hear from him, but I suspect that he'll, for different reasons, was opposed to this.
Oh, no, I mean, it's not density. Well, every development we've tried to encourage is say, how do you get more in there? R1 lots are absolutely the least what we need at this point in time, especially when they're approaching $400,000 a lot. So it's ridiculous that we're considering 25 single family homes up there and then frustrated and hand wringing over multiple density thing, which we should be encouraging. Right. It just baffles me.
Okay, good. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor
I would just like to echo a part of that and saying that I'm going to vote in favor of this amended one, but I'm sort of with you. Like if it was a comprehensive CD zone with higher density, but like better, with underground parking and like a really good sort of vision for the future of what that's all going to be like, I would be in support of that, despite it being not popular in the neighborhood. But I just don't think like a weird in the middle one is ideal. Okay. But I do think we need to keep going because mixed use is important and we don't have a lot of that in that area. So it's good to have diversity there.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to call a question. Motion on the table is a little different with density. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is opposed, balance of council in favor. Okay, we're going to move on. So Councillor Burks-Hill.
So I'm going to be recusing myself from item D and E as my parents own the adjacent lot and opposite lot in the 2 items.
Great, thank you, Councillor. All right, someone want to put item 5D on the table for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
An official community plan bylaw number 2300 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Ryan. Discussion on the motion. This is for the row house on Cedar Street. Any comments, questions?
Just a
Councillor Elliott?
Again, similar to the last issue, it's density that we're encouraging. And we improve it on this, like Newlands, we improve it on Cedar Street, it's the same thing. We need to address affordability, and you do that with smaller homes and squeezing more homes on the same size lot. And this fits right in that.
All right, thank you. Councillor Palmer, have you found your place?
Just for clarity, so this first one that we're voting on is the single lot subdivision, 2 lots, is that correct?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's the row house on Cedar Street.
So the 4-plex?
Yes.
Okay.
The next one is the single lot subdivision.
So I'll just, we've been through this a few times. I'm opposed to it because we haven't looked at the comprehensive thing. I'm in favor of higher density and making sure that we don't do it in an ad hoc fashion. And that's why I'm opposed to this. I'm not opposed to higher density. Again, listening to the residents of the area, that there isn't this sort of real good thought on how we're doing these kind of changes. So I'll be opposed to it.
All right. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. And similar to Councillor Fowler, the discussion we had at the previous proposal, I think, fits in a lot of cases, but not all. So in a couple of big differences that really stand out to me in this proposal. One, it is proposed for long-term rentals, and that is very clearly stated. The other part is that I think the access to this neighborhood is not nearly as hopeful as the access to the Newlands Road point, since the Newlands Road development we just talked about is right next to the hospital and has a roundabout planned for it. Access, I do believe, is clearly going to get better. In the Cedar Street area, I am concerned about road access and the transportation up there, both with snow removal, maintenance of the roads for safety, walkability. The whole point of walk-up residential and these higher density areas is that you don't need as many vehicles. And walking around in that section of our community can be a challenge, especially in the winter months. Again, my statements from the previous conversation stand. This is a big responsibility on our part to strive to do better and to make sure that all the corners of our community are accessible. And if we cannot do so, then we need to be very clear about that as we go forward with planning.
Okay.
I think I am supportive of this going forward, but like I said, I do have concerns and I will be taking that responsibility very seriously.
Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, this is voting on the OCP bylaw 2300. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Councillor Palmer is opposed. Balance of council are in favor. Someone want to put item D2 on for me? Councillor Ryan.
Zoning amendment bylaw number 2301 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on this motion. This is basically zoning so they can put this fourplex in there. Any further comments? Seeing none, I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Councillor Palmer is opposed. Balance of council in favor. Motion is passed. Let's call Councillor Brooks Hill back in, please. Oh, no, actually, we've got one more. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Was it for both properties?
This is, so the next one is item in Cedar Street, item 2314. This is 685 Cedar Street. They are taking and subdividing off a lot. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, someone want to put that, did I get asked that? Someone will put that on the table? Councillor Ryan?
The zoning amendment bylaw number 2314 be adopted.
Second for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Palmer.
It's a little bit different than the previous one, and this one I'm a little bit more on the fence, but I will support this motion.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We can call Mr. Bartzell back in. Thank you.
Mike?
Come back, Council. Okay, item 5, F. Someone want to put that on the table for me? So Council Palmer?
As written.
Okay, second for the motion, Council Brooks Hill. Any discussion on this motion? Council Charlotte.
All right, so this is on Douglas Street that we're looking at, right?
No, this is the property that's on Highway 23 South, 775, Highway 23 South.
Thank you. Sorry, I was lost.
Okay, so any comments on this? This is just basically a housekeeping thing for this property. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, now we're going to go on to the Douglas Street property. And so, Mr. Simon, any comments before I ask for a motion to be put on the table?
Through your worship, nothing beyond the staff report. We don't have a formal presentation, but we have pulled some of the main graphics as well as the alternative council option. Should council wish to chat about that and put it into a PowerPoint if council wants to look in depth at any more of the diagrams or consider that alternative option as well without having to read out the whole thing.
Okay, so do you want to look at the graphics first? Council Palmer, you're going to make a comment?
I'll put the motion on the table and then we can.
All right. So you're putting the motion as in the package. Seconder for that motion, please, Councilor Ryan. All right. So now we'll discuss that, but I'm going to ask Mr. Simon if he would like to bring up his PowerPoint on that just to educate the rest of us here, and then we can go from there. Go ahead, Mr. Simon.
Yeah, through your worship. So again, not a formal presentation, but just pulling out the graphics, which I know sometimes can be a little challenging to read in the packages. I'm just putting it on the screen for the benefit of council to facilitate discussion as well as benefit of the community watching. So what you see here is essentially.
Councilor Ryan has a question before we get started. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, in the report, it says that the easement reduces future uses of this city-owned parcel, and I'm curious if Mr. Simon can elaborate on like certain things that this parcel could be used for.
Yeah, so through your worship, essentially to the, I guess it would be like the northwest of this property, there is more city-owned property there where there's an existing trail network that connects up to the to City Hall. So there is potential, I guess, that there could be trail connectivity, further infrastructure uses, because we do have some infrastructure, storm and sanitary infrastructure that's in that city-owned parcel right now. So again, it's just really, it's not that there's a comprehensive plan for how that parcel is going to be used anytime soon, but it needs to be fully understood by council that should an easement be granted, it does restrict the uses. So we might not know what it is right now, but maybe in 5, 10, 15 years from now, we will have a good intended use for that parcel that's owned by the city, and that could be potentially restricted by a decision to grant an easement for the benefit of one private property owner in this circumstance.
And does that just mean that they would have to approve whatever that use is, or that you wouldn't be able to do it?
So through your worship, it would depend on the specifics of what we're looking to do, but essentially when you start granting an easement through city-owned parcel, you're identifying that area that is suitable for access for what would be 1118 Douglas Street in this particular circumstance. And what the specifics of a general easement agreement say is that it can only be discharged with the consent of both parties. Otherwise, it's kind of legal proceedings you have to go through, and that you can't really put anything within the right-of-way area without the consent of those individuals. That's intended to be maintained for access, and that's it. So it's just limiting a portion of that property specifically for access to 1118 Douglas and nothing else.
And Councilor Ryan has another comment, and then I want you to actually go through the slides and if there's photos for council. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I guess my bigger concern here is that if this easement isn't granted, it sounds like that parcel of land isn't really very usable at all. So I'm wondering, like, if the city already owns that other chunk of land, would they buy it, or like what is the plan there? Because it seems like a real shame to just have that piece of land sit vacant, not be developed, when there's locals that are keen on building a home.
Okay, so Mr. Simon, could you just go through with your a bit of description and then photos if you have them?
Yeah, so through your worship, there wouldn't be any immediate plan for the city to purchase that property. Should it not be developed, the way that the city's zoning has been undertaken in the past, you got to remember Revelstoke's an old town, a lot of history. Our zoning map has been carried forward for decades now, and that's sometimes inherited from other municipalities through annexation. So we have a lot of areas in the city that are blanket zoned, residential 1. CP Hill is a really good example. We have a lot of lots out there that are zoned residential 1 that are just steep slopes, unstable soils, very, very challenging to develop. So, we need to be cognizant of the technical factors that are limiting for development. Even if zoning is set up to allow for development, it doesn't always mean that it's suitable. And so just going through some of the slides really briefly here, you can see the site plan that's developed. It shows the slope line of the existing property, what the applicant is looking at reducing the setbacks to, which, is noted in the staff report. Staff don't have major concerns with varying the setback requirements. Essentially, the further we can get away from that slope, the better. The major concern does come through granting access through the city-owned parcel. You can see the map on the right shows the existing sanitary infrastructure in red, storm infrastructure in green, and then the subject property here a little bit next to it. This is taken from street view, so you can, this is all approximate, mind you. So you can see 1202 Douglas, which is immediately adjacent to the subject property at 1118, or on the other side of the city-owned parcel rather. You can see how their access kind of wraps around through that city-owned parcel, being a long-standing situation. You see the city-owned parcel here, and then the subject property as it starts to slope upwards along Douglas. And then that's just the alternative option should council choose to ultimately consider that. So yeah, those are just the pictures that were pulled out in case council wanted to get a larger view of them.
Great. So Councillor Elliott.
Just, Paul, where would the access, what portions could the easement placed on?
Can you go back to the previous document there? Yeah.
Through your worship. So the specifics of that actual access easement plan would need to be further discussed. So it would be on the applicant to prepare it, but essentially should council grant an easement, we would want to work closely with our engineering and public works team to ensure that the alignment of that right of way is done in a manner to minimize impact on existing city infrastructure there. So you'll see in the package that was proposed by the applicant, they kind of had an idea of where they would want it, which would kind of cut diagonally from the laneway to the subject property and span about half the width of that property or a third of the width of that property. But staff intentionally would not like to have that so specified right now because we'd want to work with the applicant and their surveyor to make sure that should an easement be supported by council, that it's done in a manner that really minimizes impact on that existing infrastructure.
So councillors, Councillor, you have further comment?
And regarding 1202, do they have an easement to use the city laneway to access their property?
Through your worship, no, there's no existing easement in place. It is a long-standing situation as far as the city can see. This was originally a right-of-way, and then it was closed and turned into a parcel that was then purchased by the city after going through a couple ownership changes, and that was really all the information that we were able to find on it. So not too much history on this one.
Councillor Ryan.
When was it purchased by the city?
Through your worship, we'd have to, I'm trying to recall the exact dates of the survey plans. I'd have to confirm that. I know that the original survey plan with it dedicated as roadway is an old survey plan from early 1900s. So this, if I'm recalling correctly, I believe it occurred sometime in the 50s or 60s.
So I'm just going forward to the screen now. So I just want to bring up a couple things that the proponent did. So this piece of property is extremely steep. So their intention is to put a home in this area here. However, they need to have geotechnical done because it really is going straight up. And this property here has a deck that kind of overlooks this whole area. And unless you're actually looking, you can't tell that there's a lot there. So their concern is Douglas Street years ago used to be more level and it was built up over the years. So it's quite a bit higher than their building or their lot. So the ability to go off of Douglas Street to get in there is negligible. because you're dropping down at least this, maybe as high as I am, to get down there. So their intention was to come across what appeared to be an old city laneway here, and then put their carport underneath their house and what they're talking about. However, at this point in time, they need to still look at the geotechnical stuff to even see if it's feasible to go to that sort of thing. So all of the things that they're doing, if it was best case scenario, would be, this is the way that they could access that sort of thing. So, we need to decide is, granting them, basically you've got it on the table, the motion is to deny it. If you want, our staff to work with them, that would go, basically that they work with this to see if they can reconfigure the access. And then they basically have to look at that sort of thing and see if it's even viable, right? Councilor.
Yeah, in the option 1 here to approve it, but have them do some of the easement agreement and the geotechnical assessment, have you, do you know if the proponent is open to that, like taking on that work?
Mr. Simon, go ahead.
Through your worship, yes, we've been in close contact with the development proponent and informed them that these would be recommended preconditions to issuance. I also note too, they do fall within a steep slope development permit area. So the geotech is required regardless. And even if they didn't fall within a steep slope area, the building official would most definitely require a geotech given the constraints on the site. So all this work is going to be done regardless. And what the intent with those preconditions to issuance was is, should council deem an easement to be appropriate and support an easement, that they would be able to get the permit approved today. The applicant would go off, work on the easement, get their surveyor to draw up all the paperwork and do up the plans, do their geotech assessment. Once everything complies with applicable policy, then that would satisfy those conditions. They would be able to have their permits issued and ultimately submit a building permit application.
Councilor Ryan, then Councilor Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I think given that they're willing to do most of that work and then work with staff, I mean, I definitely appreciate staff's recommendation, given that they're looking at it more from like an administrative and city utilities asset sort of risk perspective. But the other thing that I think is worth mentioning that was in the proponent's package, but not in the staff report, was that when they purchased the lot, none of the documents that they had looked at showed the easement. So it was just showed as a right of way. So they had made all these plans, like not assuming, but like, there's always risk in these types of things, but it seems like they had kind of an idea of what they were getting into and then discovered this after like a year of owning it kind of thing. So I think if they're willing to assume the work that staff is requiring, that I'm in support of approving it subject to those recommendations by staff.
Okay, Councilor Charlotte.
Thank you, Worship. I'm also leaning towards approving the easement. I agree. I live in that area, and I think the laneway, I can understand why you would think that was a city laneway and a regular access point. Yeah. And this is a great example of creative building in corners of our city to do some more infill. I appreciate that there are requirements for the geotechnical assessment to make sure that it's safe and that we're not compromising on any safety issues. I also appreciate the staff's concerns with the access to the utilities and the future use of that lot, because I think we should always be concerned about what city-owned lots will be used for in the future. However, again, living in the area, to me, and when you look at the plans, when you look at the mapping here even, I think the best use that I could see for that lot in the future would be better public access to be able to navigate through trail systems up and down that slope. It is quite steep, and right now that trail is not really accessible. And I would love to see that built up more as a pedestrian corridor with the easement agreements with the proponents. But time will tell. That's a lot of work to be done. Nothing's guaranteed.
Councilor Palmer. Oh, Councilor Elliott, did you have a comment? Councilor Palmer and then Councilor Elliott. Go ahead, Councilor Palmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. A few questions. Regarding the parcel, the city-owned parcel, that's 1125 Douglas Street. So It seems to me, and this would be a question for engineering, I think, that for some reason, this would normally be, I think normally this would be basically just a right-of-way, city right-of-way for the utilities and not an individual parcel. A question for the Director of Engineering, do you foresee any need for something like a pump station, a sewage lift station, or any, like what's unusual about this parcel compared to other places where there's just right-of-ways for utilities?
Mr. Black?
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Palmer. The difference being that this is a lot and not a road access. And so typically our facilities are placed on a lot that is dedicated for that purpose, i.e. a lift station. In this case, I have no knowledge of any future city infrastructure that would be required to service this part of Lower Town with sanitary or water or storm beyond what is there now. So that's the real difference, is that this is a parcel and not a road where we typically would have access agreements for everybody, including our utilities and including all the franchise utilities. So that is the concern, is that we don't know what the future use is, but it's not typical for us to grant something like a private easement to a private party over a public parcel.
Okay,
yeah, so further to that, like we don't know why that parcel was created and then purchased by the city. And it might be difficult to know, go back into history. Another question. So there was some work being done. There's a water or sewer line that goes through there. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Mr. Black?
Correct.
Is there a water line or not?
No, it's on this subject parcel, there's only water, or I'm sorry, not water, sanitary sewer and storm.
Right. And then there was some work being done on there a couple of years ago. It seemed to last for quite a while. That might have been before your time. Are you familiar with that work that was done?
Through your worship to Council Palmer, yes, I am. And that was to mitigate some damage to the storm drain system underneath Douglas Street. And so we had a damaged pipe in that area. And so that was the work, was to repair that and to address some ponding issues on Douglas Street at that area.
And then it seems that when we go to, I'm going to go now to their request to have access. So if this was just a normal right-of-way rather than a parcel, they would have that access. Essentially, there would be a city lane going to the parcel at 118. And right now, 118, if we deny this, as is on the motion that's there right now, then technically they would be allowed a access from Douglas. Then we can't landlock the property, but that wouldn't make any sense at all to have a driveway access from Douglas. I guess that's more of a question to the planner.
Mr. Simon, comments?
Through your worship, yeah, they'd be able, there's a laneway at the rear that they could potentially access from, and then Douglas Street as well. And this would need to be demonstrated to be ultimately feasible through their analysis for their development proposal. I'm not sure if Mr. Black has anything further to add on to that, but yeah, it would be at the front of the property off Douglas or the rear of the property off that existing laneway.
Yeah, and then through the mayor, being familiar with that trail that Councillor Chulette talked about going, that's very, very steep. I've gone down that many times. Like, it seems very impractical to have probably close to impossible to have a rear access. And so to me, it ends up having to be on Douglas Street. So the request from the applicant makes logical sense to me. And the question is, well, why should the city not permit this access? And I don't see a compelling reason for that because we still have access to the utilities that are there. Furthermore, I guess on that trail, the accessibility that Councillor Gillette talked about, making that a better, that's probably something that would get referred to Parks and Recreation on the Trails Master Plan. But how do you make that a better trail? Because it is used quite a fair bit.
So Councillor Palmer, does that trail come down on the city-owned property or on the private property?
If we could get that the first slide. So you basically come right down here. And it probably encroaches a little bit onto that property.
Yeah.
You come right down through there.
Okay.
And this is, like was mentioned, this is extremely.
I think the trail comes up right further.
Oh, sorry, am I getting mixed up?
See the 1125?
Yes, I'm mixed up a little
So
bit.
it doesn't come down the alley, then it comes down.
Yeah,
down from Third
down
Street.
through there.
Okay.
That's correct.
That makes sense.
That's correct, yeah, sorry, I'm corrected on that. And so, to me, having this access makes sense, and I'm almost wondering why we need all this land if it's just a sewer line. It's a pretty big parcel. But Mayor Sulz, I'm not sure who the seconder, but I think I put the motion on the table here, and I'm suggesting that I withdraw that motion.
Okay.
Because I think it's too black and white, but I'll just say where my mind is going is that just goes directly to DVP 2021 be deferred, subject to staff working with the applicant to look at more viable options. But I'm not sure. I don't want to withdraw that just yet. I just want to see if there's any sort of implications there.
Well, there's a suggestion in the report, option 1 that staff put in that seems pretty well laid out in terms of the steps. Yeah, you bet. Option number 1, that the request would be granted, that be approved, and then the second would be the DVP, be approved the following variance to reduce the setbacks, and then subject to the following preconditions to issuance. So that's the applicant enter into an access agreement with the city to permit access to the city-owned lot, blah, 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 and that the applicant provide a geotechnical assessment to demonstrate feasibility of the proposed construction.
Okay, so are you comfortable withdrawing now?
Yeah, potentially. I just want to ask to the planner,
Sure.
What's the drawbacks behind that other than just this over caution as to providing the access? Is there
Mr. Simon, comment?
Through your worship, I think city staff need to be very careful where we unilaterally decide that a city-owned parcel is suitable to be provided access for a private party. I mean, generally speaking, city-owned parcels are supposed to be for the benefit of the entire community, not one individual landowner. So that's why you're seeing staff's recommendation, and in conjunction with the existing infrastructure that's in there, and also in addition to not knowing our future needs for that parcel, we don't want to be limiting it. So that really is the rationale behind staff's recommendation to not be supporting an easement. But again, it is at council's prerogative, should they deem it to be appropriate, to grant an easement that would ultimately allow for the development variance permit to be issued based on what the applicant has proposed. And the resolution that's on the screen is reflective of pursuing that option.
So based on that, I withdraw my motion with consent of the seconder.
Who was the consent?
Okay. And then I'll put.
Okay, me or Rob?
Okay.
So, and then I'll put the motion option.
So who do you have? Okay, Jackie. And so Tim, we're going to withdraw that motion for staff's benefit. And now you're going to put another motion on, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so option 1 as written.
Okay, so option 1 is written, going to be seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. And you want to speak to it? Okay.
So I went out with the applicants and looked at the lot, and I agree with many of the things brought up by Councillor Palmer stated. If the access isn't through the city lot, the only reasonable option is onto Douglas Street, which I don't think is a benefit to the community. I think it's a horrible place to have a driveway, even if it is possible, which I not entirely sure it would be possible to have a driveway and build a house. As I told the applicants, I'm not 100% sure, and I do have problems, as staff said, with granting an individual access through a city parcel that's only benefiting them. There's clearly, it's not going to go any further from there. It's only to the benefit of them. However, there's no other option other than going through the city land. And, you know, as to our previous discussion, we want to see more density. And they are only proposing building a single family house. However, that's the highest and best density on that parcel. And looking at the city's parcel, we keep saying, well, what could we do there? In theory, the city could build a house on that parcel, or, you know, maybe some kind of housing would be the only thing that comes to mind. But I trust staff to use the minimum of the city's land there. I think there would still be possible with the easement. So I'm supportive of this.
Okay, any other comments from councilors? Councilor Elliott and Councilor Palmer.
Just on the city parcel, the majority of it is very steep and it's not likely to be built upon. Yeah, the front part that's between 1202 and 1198 or whatever the number is. Is basically there are many people using the laneway that comes in from Hanson or whatever the street is on the adjacent. There's 1202 that use it, and there's the future RMR parcel that's on that property adjacent to it, which is meant to be staff comment when was there argument. So the laneway is currently got an easement on it. It must have access, I believe. So this would just be crossing the parcel. It wouldn't be much different than what's already in place. Just be extending that laneway further. And currently, 1202's driveway is right in the middle of it.
Yeah, they just use that too.
So I don't think it's a stretch. The one problem I do have is though requiring a geotechnical assessment just at the proposal stage is problematic. It's a major expense, and if he doesn't get the easement, he's not, you know, no sense to spend money on geotechnical. So let's say, okay, if we're conceptually in favor of it, then you can go get your geotechnical and progressively down the line, spend the money as you need to. I think that needs to be considered.
So we've got a motion on the table. Councilor Palmer, any comments?
Yeah, just a couple other comments. Again, in favor of the motion. As far as the highest and best use, having looked at that, I could visualize like a 4-story thing, because you could have some coming right off off Douglas and have underground parking. And to me, there's some viability for a higher use, and I would like to see that. However, it is zoned as it is right now, which I think is R2, which would allow a duplex. Again, that could be even an up and down duplex with parking down below, but we'll leave that for the developer to figure out. But I think I would encourage a higher use. On the geotechnical, which is not part of this motion, that'd be the.
It is, it's subject to the following precondition, it's the last line.
No, but that's the second.
Oh, yes.
That's the second motion.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll speak to it at that point.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to grant an easement. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Somebody want to put item 2 on? That the applicant provide a geotechnical assessment. Councillor Sherlott, seconded by Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on that? Basically, the full motion says applicant provide a geotechnical assessment to demonstrate feasibility of the proposed construction. So anything further with that, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, just for clarity, and as shown on the screen, I think you guys had dealt with option 1, and then
Yep.
option 2 is granting the entire variance subject to the preconditions that the applicant enters into the easement agreements, that gets registered and all the paperwork's filed, and then the second item being that they provide a geotech assessment.
Okay, so I can't really see the whole screen, so item 2 that, so maybe we'll back up a little bit and we'll go back to item number 2, that they get the full easement and they do the paperwork, correct?
Through your worship, so there's 2 resolutions. The first one is that council endorses the easement, which you guys have just passed. And then the second one is that the development variance permit be approved, subject to those 2 preconditions to issuance.
Okay, so someone, Councilor Palmer.
So for clarity, I think the motion's on the table, but for clarity, the motion is number 2 on page 4 of your report, which is quite a lengthy motion on page 4 and 5 of your report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, so I was 1 page down. I apologize.
So speaking to the motion, I think it's prudent to require the geotechnical assessment because when you look at that lot, it might not be feasible. You know, it just may not be feasible, and I'd hate to see them going into a big commitment without understanding how difficult that's going to be to construct on. And certainly those reductions in setbacks I think are very necessary, and they need to sort of figure that piece out.
So we've got the motion on the table for the geotechnical. Let's do that one, and then we'll go back to this other one. Are you guys okay with that? Is that okay, Mr. Simon, doing it kind of backwards?
Through your worship, ultimately at council's prerogative, the way that it's presented in the package is that it's all one resolution, that the variance be approved subject to those 2 preconditions to issuance.
Okay, good. All right, sorry. We'll go back to that. So we'll do it all in one. Basically, all of those things are going to be in there.
So we're okay with the easement, we're okay with the setbacks. If you want to proceed, next step is geotechnical.
Yeah.
That's what we're getting to. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. So basically, that's all the motions we need for them to proceed. Is that correct, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, yes, you guys had passed 2 separate resolutions, one supporting the easement, and then the second one supporting the variance, subject to that easement being registered and subject to a geotech assessment being provided.
Okay, so I guess my statement to the proponents is before you go out and spend too much money, make sure you get your geotechnical done, so it's going to be something that's affordable. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, so we're going to move on to item H. Housing agreement bylaw. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Ryan.
That housing agreement bylaw number 2316 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. This is dealing with a property at 519 2nd Street West. Any comments or questions regarding this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Announcements from the mayor. The only thing that I wanted to bring up in conversation I had with some of our hoteliers in this past week is that in the province of Alberta, they've pretty well relinquished most things for those people, no masks, that sort of thing. Here they're coming out and are actually saying to some of the people, no, I don't need to wear a mask. And so I'm just saying we have regulations that we have to abide by, the Provincial Health Office has put out. So we are still mandated for masks in public as well as the vaccine. So I'm just saying to people as you're here, please follow those rules. We don't want to make it difficult for you, but some of our elderly staff who are doing the best that they can to eat your breakfast in the morning don't need to hear you upsetting them as far as saying I don't need a mask. And when you're 6 feet tall and burly, that gets a little scary for people. So I just want that to go up. We're going to move on to item 9A. Someone want to put that on the Councillor.
That fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2319 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Brooks Hill. That's dealing with the patios and relief associated with use of sidewalks. Is that correct, Ms. McKay?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any comments or questions regarding that? Councillor Palmer?
Just a question on the, some time ago, there was a proposal of more comprehensive changes to the fees and charges, and what's the status of that?
Any comment on that, Ms. McKay?
It will be coming back to council shortly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
I have a question regarding the loss of revenue from the patios. Did we take that from the restart funds to make up for it in our city revenue stream?
Ms. McCabe?
Through Your Worship, we could if it's necessary. It's not felt that this is a significant loss of revenue at this point. So it wasn't planned to, we weren't planning to recommend that to council.
So it wasn't done in the past 2 years? Okay.
All right. Good. Any further comments or questions on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to unfinished business. Reconsideration of limitations respecting electronic attendance for council members at council meetings, currently not being enforced until February 28, 2022. And so I have a motion here. So we're revisiting this. So I basically would recommend this resolution that limitations on electronic attendance at council meetings by council members not be enforced for the remainder of this council term. Anyone want to second that motion? Councillor Palmer. Any further discussion on that motion? That basically gives us the rest of the year. We don't know what's going to happen with COVID. That if we are not feeling well and we're able to join electronically, we have that ability. You okay with that, Councillor Charlotte?
Just to clarify though, the wording of the bylaw did allow for that still. And we could extend, if there was an extenuating circumstances, if one of us was ill and not able to attend meetings, we could extend that limitation without having to hold off on enforcing.
So, Ms. Floyd, comment?
Yes, Councillor Charlotte. So you're right, that is in there, but we just thought it would be easier should something flash up again with COVID, that it would just be easier to not have to have a specific resolution to in camera to allow for that for a specific council member.
Oh, I see. So
does that make sense?
If it were to come up without this extension of limitations, then we would need to make an in-camera resolution and to allow for that for.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, I had academically, I had the sort of same question. It's not really necessary, but maybe there's, one way or the other. I question whether it would have to go in camera, but anyway, I think we can just support it because the intent is there and it's in front of us.
Fair.
Okay. Any further comment? Councillor?
Is this a governance issue that's dealt with at the provincial level and how they deal with municipalities, or are we just stretching beyond our?
No, they basically said we have the option to do this if we need to, but basically they really pushed that and basically said we need to go back in camera or to in-person meetings, correct? Okay.
So that's only to a certain point though, right? Like they enacted this resolution that we could go to these remote.
Yeah, and they pulled it last fall.
They pulled, okay.
Okay. Seeing no more questions, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to corporate services, talking about the election. Someone want to make this motion? Councillor Brooks.
That pursuant to section 58(1) of the Local Government Act, Cindy Floyd be appointed Chief Election Officer and Jolene Rousseau be appointed Deputy Chief Election Officer for the purpose of conducting the 2022 general local election.
Okay, second for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to 11B, Development Services. So do you want to make any comment, Mr. Simon, before I put this motion on the table?
Through your worship, no, nothing else from Development Services, but we're here to answer questions should you guys have questions. Or
Okay.
here to help answer questions. Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Ryan's putting it on.
That the report titled Official Community Plan Comprehensive Review Update prepared by P. Simon dated February 22nd, 2022 be received.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion or questions for Mr. Simon? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you for the report. I was hoping that we would have this OCP done before the timelines that are maybe suggested here. What's the earliest date that we could have the OCP adopted?
Through your worship, if something is presented to council by June 14th or June 28th and first and second reading is granted, public hearing could potentially take place in June. And should there be no changes, we could be looking at, end of June for third reading and beginning of August for adoption. It all depends on how quickly council wants to usher it through the process once it's ultimately presented to them. There's definitely some areas where it could overlap a little bit. The first meeting could be first and second reading, direction for public hearing rather than just first reading. So definitely some areas where we can expedite.
Councillor Palmer,
yeah.
Councillor Short.
Yeah, so my comment is like there's been an enormous amount of work put into this and a lot of resources, 300,000 to date. And so, I'm anxious to get it through. And so, whatever, I think this is going to be one of the major things that are done, and OCPs are never perfect. There's always little things there, but it would be a real shame if we don't get this done and if it goes squirrely at that late in our terms.
I like that comment. Thank you for that. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you to the team, I'd be curious to hear just a quick update on how the conversation is going and the process is going with the policy teams.
Mr. Thacker, do you have any comment on that?
I have no direct comment about what the policy team is doing. What I could say though is in response, we could have a OCP at least in a proposed draft form in April. But what we're managing is the expectations of external community, council, and how much consultation you want to continue to do, because we can, as Paul has suggested in the memo, there's things that if you want to tweak those things, we can do that to shorten up some of those things, because we're balancing. Not only the intention that this is supposed to be a visionary document, and it is meant to be a living document, it will get changed. And if you want a new council to come in and do a 180 and say, no, we don't want to do this. I've seen it happen. So I don't want to, I don't want to say this is written in stone, because it's not. So if council wants us to shorten some of these steps, we can do that.
Right, and just if I could, just to clarify, I actually really appreciate the process that's been going through, and I think we're getting into that home stretch now where it's really important we don't rush through these final, to me, the potential, this is why I wanted to hear how things are going and where it's already heading before I try to jump in with any ideas. But there's this opportunity to have these robust conversations at the policy team's conversations so that we set some clear vision and direction in the OCP through these policy documents, so that the work for the next 5 to 20 years is well guided and we have that community buy-in so that we don't have everything flip back afterwards. But
I don't know if you can, I've seen lots of municipal development plans, official community plans, and it's really dependent on a new council can change anything.
Right.
And it's just the nature of the beast. So that said, I think the OCP is a good foundation document, and I think Paul, I don't know what the policy team, because I think if you're specifically talking about these policy groups, I think we've got all that information. We need to bring it in now and get it in a document Because otherwise, if it doesn't move forward, it's just gonna sit there. And these things, council can always change. If council said, oh, you know, we wanna look at economic development or we wanna look at something, you can always do that at any time.
Yeah.
Good. All right, Councillor Ryan and then Councillor Palmer.
I think the issue is just that people have been waiting for years to get their hands on this so that they can dive into it. So if we rush it out now, we are doing a disservice to the people who are volunteering their time to have some input.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be rushed. I think it's at a place where I think it's ready for somebody to say, okay, this is what we think.
Well, I think Mr. Simon has just basically stated this is where we're at. It's probably an appropriate place, and as Councillor Palmer said, we want to get this done. Councillor Palmer, you have a comment.
Yeah, so I agree with Councillor Gillette and Councillor Ryan that we don't want to rush. What I'd also say is we don't want to relax either. And so I guess the message that I would give to staff is don't let council detract from the importance of this. And so making sure we do the due diligence. We've done tons and tons of work. Let's pull us to the finish line. Let's not get detracted, because if we do, it's going to cost us the community enormous amounts. If it goes to the next council, it's going to cost a lot more, and we've invested an incredible amount of money. So,
and we've all stated we want it done in our term. Yeah. So absolutely. All right. So I'm
That's Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Paul, is there any update on the policy teams?
So through your worship, essentially where we're at right now is the policy teams have had kind of their workbooks with a whole host of draft policies, action items. And one of the key things that we really wanted to do was present it to them in a format that will be most usable, so that once we get all the feedback, it can kind of be slotted in to the more or less the table of contents of the official community plan, so that it kind of cuts out one of those steps of, okay, taking the feedback and saying, okay, well, what section should this be applicable to? So they have a really robust working document to work with. We were targeting a February 25th deadline, which gave them about 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks to review. Scheduling is very, very challenging. We're managing a group of 25 volunteers in addition to the focus group team of over 20. So some of them have requested an extension to March 4th. Staff have been doing everything that we possibly can to be doubling up on the tasks where we have the ability to do so to meet these timelines. So for example, doing outreach with external organizations like the CSRD, BC Transit, to understand what their interests are, to make sure it's reflected, so that when they get a referral, it's as streamlined as that process can be, so that we're not getting any big red flags at the conclusion of the process. So we're working really, really hard to front end the process right now. And I think one of the key things for council and the community, there's been so much work that's already been put into this, so much community consultation. So we're really at the point now where we need to wrap that up in a meaningful way, take that feedback, put it into a document, and bring it forward to council for ultimate consideration, and make sure that the community is informed of what that document is, so that they're well prepared to give feedback to council at the public hearing. And what staff are hoping for is that we have great advocates to come out to really discuss the robust process that this went through to get in final form.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, so I'll call the question. Councillor Palmer, call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Mayor Sulz, I'm contemplating putting a motion on the table as a follow-up that the official community plan comprehensive review be the #1 priority in the staff work plan. Just hesitating putting that motion on, but just to emphasize it, I just wondering if the CAO sees any benefit to that, benefit or drawbacks.
I think if I could answer your council's question, and I spoke to the mayor earlier, if council is disciplined about the deadlines that we proposed and established to get it done by the end of June, we can do it. And that's lots of time, I feel, to get it done. If there's any reason to pause for any reason, and I'm not judging it, it'll fall apart. It'll be difficult to get it finished. If we're disciplined about what we're doing and how we're doing it right now, we can get it done. By the end of June.
I guess the point behind that motion is to keep us, you know, I'm saying staff to make it a number one priority, but it's to keep us disciplined from, you know, when we say do something else, you can say, well, make up your mind, council.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, if this is council's number one priority, yes, you can make that policy statement.
Okay,
so I'll put that motion on the table that the official community plan comprehensive review be the number one priority for staff's work plan. It's staff's work plan. It's not ours. Yeah.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte, any further discussion on that? That's basically holding us to the grindstone to basically say we need to get this done. And so conversation with the CEO earlier today was, do you think council wants to move this forward? And my comment is yes, we all want to get this done as quickly as we can. So I think you've already made that statement. I appreciate that, Councillor Palmer.
I'm just gonna say it again though, like this is, of all the times to rush it, this isn't the one. Like finally the work is getting done. I'd like not to dismiss the other $300,000, but this is the real meat and potatoes. And so if we rush that, we're doing a disservice to the community. I know that that's not your intention either. I just, if that's what is required, then that's what we should do.
Yeah. Okay, and I think we need to go through those steps. Councillor.
So if I should, Mayor, to Councillor Ryan, so do you think that motion is ill-advised at this point, or?
I think if it's directed at staff, then no, because it's them helping however they see fit. But it would really suck if the unintended repercussion of that was to rush through incorporating some feedback or to make it more general than it has to be, things like that, just in the just to get it done. Yeah. That would really suck.
So,
in my opinion.
yeah, so fair comment, because with this motion though, it's the number one priority. It doesn't mean that something might happen that causes something else to happen. So that's pretty vague, but
Yeah, I agree. I think this helps, like you say, keeps us accountable. That if there's other things we want done, yes, but this is number one priority. So I trust staff to be able to find the balance in that, and that this prompts the team, Mr. Zachary, to be able to come back to us. And if we ask for too much, he'll come back and let us know that, hey, just so you know, this is affecting our number one priority.
Okay, good. All right. Any further comment? All right. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, let's move on to engineering. C, greenhouse gas reducing compost. Something that's right up Councillor Elliott's alley. So, Mr. Black, do you want to make any comment before we start putting further that on the table here?
Yeah, Your Worship, I have a very, very brief presentation, basically highlights of collecting garbage and composting, if I might.
Absolutely. Brief at this time of the day is welcome.
I'm assuming you can see this?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. So 2021 council priorities were to initiate the process to become a Bear Smart community. In November of last year, we went to the committee of the whole and gave you a presentation, and there was a robust discussion regarding the options that staff had presented to council. Background, we have about 3,000 residences. We have one garbage truck. All the residences provide their own containers. Our budget on an annual basis is about $350,000, and the cost in 2021 was $122 a year per residence. Composting facility is ready to be opened at the Revelstoke landfill. These are the options or the requirements in order to become a Bear Smart community, and that's bear-proof containers, dealing with compost, and making sure that we have the bylaws in place to manage all of these components, and a compliance strategy. So lots of things to do in order to do it. So the summary of the discussion in November was rolling bins for garbage and composting will not work in mobile home parks. An alternative must be found. And so the report in front of you discusses a hybrid solution where we have bins in locations with limited secure storage and rolling containers for all other residences. We will continue to service all of the homes that are in the community with this process. We'll be able to purchase a new truck will be required in order to lift containers and bins. All the containers and bins will be bear-proofed. We do want to engage with a automated lifting mechanism for these containers so that we don't hurt our own staff, as compost can sometimes get very, very heavy. Bear-proof containers, bear-proof bins, and a truck with capacity for all compost, garbage, and lifting both containers and bins.
And bears.
And saving the bears, absolutely, which is a huge thing in our community. And I don't mean to minimize that, because it is extremely important that we address this as a community. So as part of our research in the last 2 months for this presentation of today, we did engage with the greenhouse gas specialist, who's indicated that should we follow through with this program and implement it, that we can roughly reduce our greenhouse gas impact by almost 10,000 tons a year, or an 80% reduction. So this is huge for the city to have this sort of option. What are the financial implications? $3.1 million to make this all happen. Opportunity. This is a really nice thing to be able to present to council, is that there is a grant program available right now for this sort of infrastructure. It covers 73% of the cost, or $2.3 million roughly, and the city contribution to become a Bear Smart community and enter into composting would be around $830,000. Council's endorsement is required for us to apply for this grant. The grant closes 2 days from now on the 24th. So timing is everything.
Hope you're ready.
We are absolutely ready. So the recommendation had many items in it, as you're aware. Most of these are housekeeping, should council support the findings of the report. That is to add this project to the long-term capital plan and amend the 5-year capital plan to include borrowing of the city portion of the cost for a short-term borrow. That means about $5 a month for 5 years in order for the city to fund their portion, our portion of this grant, and that council directs staff to bring forward a short-term borrowing bylaw in the amount of $830,000. If we're unsuccessful, the total costs of entering this program will be borne by the households in the city. And assuming a 15-year borrow for 3.1, that means that we would be adding about $6 a month for 15 years in order to achieve the Bear Smart community goals and to enter into composting. So you're aware, Bear Aware is firmly behind the proposal that is in front of you. And I'm very pleased to have not only Bear Aware, but the Environmental Action Committee and WildSite is also in support of this. That concludes my very, very brief presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, so we're going to get the first part of the motion. I'm assuming that Ms. Floyd, we're doing further that all in separate rather than one big thing. Comment?
Sorry, no, your worship, it is all one entire recommendation.
Okay, I like that. So let's get this on the table. Councillor Ryan, who loves bears, is going to Get us going, yes.
I won't read the whole thing, but that a grant funding application for the greenhouse gas reducing compost and solid waste program in the amount of 3.111530 be submitted through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, and the rest of the wonderful things that follow as laid out in our package.
All right, seconded for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? I think this is a great thing, but Councillor Ryan is jonesing again to speak, so I'll let her go.
So glad to hear that there's a grant, and I think this is such an amazing opportunity, and finally we can do some sort of meaningful green initiative and helping become a Bear Smart community, which is something that I think all of us would have loved to have happened, 10, 15 years ago when some of the other tourism communities were doing it, but better late than never. And it's great. That's all.
And even if we weren't able to get the grant, this is palatable.
Totally.
It really is. So, Councillor Palmer.
Yes, I'm very supportive as well. Aside from the Bear Aware stuff, really this is an economically responsible thing to do.
Right.
With half our waste going into the landfill, which is creating leachate, long-term problems. It's a marketable product. So it's economically, even if we take the environmental and social stuff out of this, economics, they do this. And then it's very, very obvious on the environmental side. It's the way to go. There's some details in there that I could start to split straw or something, but but there'll be some more details as we go along, and if there needs to be a little bit of massaging, we'll get there. But I'm very pleased that we're proceeding with this program.
Thank you, Councillor Schiffman.
I also am very supportive of this. I'm very excited to see us moving forward and having a viable option to be able to be the bold leaders that we were talking about when we talked with the CSRD about the compost facility. This is a really important step that we need to be able to collect that compost, and we have been dealing with bear issues for far too long. Is it perfect? No, nothing is ever perfect. There's always things we could do incrementally better, but I'm very proud of what's come forward with this. Including all of the engagement and the conversations around it. I hope that the community agrees with us and realizes this is an important debt to take on and a payment that is more than bearable considering the benefits. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor?
Just a question. I think it's.
You gotta say something.
No, how optimistic are you on the grant?
That if I had a crystal ball, I would be very rich. And probably not working at this point in my life. So unfortunately, I have no rough feeling, but I think that the report, the application, and council's support, in addition to the community support with the other groups, lend to a very, very strong application. And I'm hopeful that we will be successful. We have been successful because we are spending time in creating and writing really, really strong applications. And so if that is consistent and we have been getting lots of grants, then we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.
No, whether we get the grant or not, it's irrelevant to me, but I think it's long overdue for the environment, the social, and the economic, as Tim suggested. But I know the federal government has been spending money with abandon, and I just wonder whether a grant may be on infrastructure may be part of their, they're already stretched. And I think they're going deeper and deeper into debt. So maybe the viability of getting a grant may be suspect in the future. But regardless, I'm all for it. So thanks for the work, Steve.
Thank you.
No other comments? All right, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Black. And tomorrow I'm going out to get you a crystal ball and one of those little
Set your reminder, your alarm for 2 days from now. This would be a real shame if we missed the deadline.
All right, let's move on. Item 11D. Someone want to make this motion, Councilor Palmer?
That the submission of an application to UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Operations Centers and Training Stream for up to $25,000 be approved.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Brooks Hill. Discussion on the motion. Any comment, Mr. Thackeray? No. Okay, I will then call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Correspondence, Revelstoke Vintage Car Club. So basically they are asking us to restrict patios until their car show is over in June. I asked Mr. Simon when they normally go out. So as soon as we clean our streets, sometime usually the end of March, that sort of thing. So that would kind of be holding us up. But Mr. Simon, you had some comments and some discussions with Director of Parks. Any comment?
Yeah, through your worship, I know the Director of Parks as well as the Director of Engineering had provided some feedback on this. Essentially, it is quite a challenging ask. You know, you typically see in a year where we don't have a lot of snow, the patios might be out end of March, beginning of April, right? Like you said, as soon as the streets are cleared. So this would really be asking them to delay for up to 2 months, which is, you know, potentially 1/3 of the entire patio season. And we have a lot of businesses, and I know the Director of Economic Development looked at this as well. A lot of businesses that are just recovering from COVID, that this would be, you know, a potential another shot to them as well. So something that staff typically really wouldn't support. But again, the communication is directed at council for consideration.
And so, Councillor Palmer, you may comment before I carry on.
Yeah, so, you know, I thought about this. The show and shine is it's a big thing. It's a draw. It's important. And so now we have this conflict, and you know, the point that's made, you know, the obvious economic viability of the downtown and stuff. And I'm thinking there has to be a solution to make this a successful show and still allow the patios. And I'm not sure exactly how to go about that, but one possibility is to actually ask the Chamber of Commerce, saying, here's the request. What can we do? You know, if it's a matter of opening up other streets that we close, you know, the city closes, I think that could you know, be something viable. I don't think we're going to be the problem solvers here, but I hate to just say no. So that's a possibility, is referring it to the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, and I don't disagree. I think even our Parks and Rec director can work with them, and there are opportunities to open up the streets and make sure that we can make this come to pass. And I don't necessarily see having the patios out there as a restriction, in as much as we may just need to move some cars, but I think having the patios open will be another draw to bring people downtown. And so, you know, you're downtown, you get a look at cars, you want to have a meal or you know, liquid refreshment or something like that, you have that ability. And I think it would enhance this and doesn't do away with it. So it's not that we're saying no, we just think that we can work with them to make it work. And so, Councillor Charlotte, you have your hand.
I do. I agree with everything that you're saying, as well as Councillor Palmer's suggestion that the mix of the two would make for a pretty cool place. I've always been a loud proponent for place building and community programming that helps drive the use of our spaces. And one of the lacks that I see is that lack of a strategy of what does this look like. I believe we have an events policy that the Parks and Rec director works with, but I don't know that we have that broader idea of what those spaces could look like. I don't know that referring to the Chamber of Commerce would be helpful. I think this does fit more in the Parks and Rec space, and I would just ask that I would suggest perhaps a motion to direct the Parks and Rec director to work with the Vintage Car Club to look at ideas for how to make this event work for our community.
So just, I think I can second it, maybe just tidy up the motion a little bit. So there is a committee for approving public events. We could actually just refer this request. That's Lori.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the same thing.
Public events?
There's a committee, a council committee to approve public events.
Public events. We could just refer it to them.
Isn't there one of you that sit on that committee as well?
I think you're on.
Yeah, Council.
Yeah, I sit on public arts, that's where I haven't seen any conversation around that. I mean, granted, it's been a pandemic for 2 years, so understandable. So, yeah.
Okay, Councillor.
If I could suggest, I mean, basically what happens in the vintage car zone, they leave a laneway right down the middle of the street and park their cars on an angle on the sides against the sidewalk. And I'm saying, why does that have to be continued? Why can't you not align your cars differently or do something different with the way you lay out things?
Well, and that's basically what our councillor is saying. Figure out a way to work with our Parks Department and make it work. And
we want to make it work, just
yeah.
not going to delay.
So go back to that motion. So can we go to as Councillor Palmer said, the event committee, and then let Parks and Rec deal with that sort of thing as well.
But sorry, in principle, you're not in favor of shutting down patios.
No,
that's what I'm.
Yeah, we're not.
We work with the patios as they are, make a better space. But I want to make sure we're being thoughtful about that and setting precedent that other events could mirror so that we can build the capacity of our events. It's not a one-off, everyone has to do it on their own.
Ms. Floyd, you turned your camera on, so you're going to tell us something.
I did. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm that the terms of reference for the committee to approve public events, the purpose is to serve as an approval body for council with respect to the community applications for public special occasion licenses, so public events including alcohol.
Right, so
I'm not sure that it is appropriate to refer it to that committee for this instance.
We can refer it back to Ms. Floyd or Ms. Donato to work with the Vintage Car Club, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So you guys okay changing that?
I second it.
Okay, so Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Palmer will do that motion. And any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried. Does that work for you, Ms. Floyd? Perfect, good. All right, Community Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Any comments regarding that? Ms. Braun is here. Do you have any questions for her? Now you walked in the door, we're going to yell at you.
I'm here for the in-camera stuff.
Okay. All right, seeing none, we'll leave that. Going on to Finance Committee recommends to Council. Councillor Ryan.
That the Finance Committee recommends to Council that Council approve the Safe Restart Community Grant Policy F18.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Brooks Hill. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Elliott.
I think when we were given the money for the grant, I think I conveyed to the Cedar, Don at the time, that this was an opportunity to do something big. Really sit back and evaluate, we could do something really grand to restart the account or do something totally different. With the, whether it was daycare, a massive investment in the structure, or a retraining program for seniors to get employees on back into the workforce. There's a whole series of things that could have been entertained. We have not done that. And now we're putting $10,000 segments into the to restart. That to me is criminal. We had the opportunity to hit a home run and we're putting down bunts if you're a baseball player. So I look at, creating a policy is great, but we just missed the boat. And I say, so to me, that is the criminal side of things.
Okay, so yeah, that's your opinion, and I look at it a little differently. We use that for the corporation of the city of Revelstoke.
We use that. Okay. Yeah.
For some of the things that we needed to get across. So we used those funds for some of that stuff, which means that we didn't have to go back to the taxpayer to increase costs so that we needed to cover these expenses. So it may not be what you feel, and we may have gone down the wrong path. However, so the grant policy here in front of us, are you happy with it, not happy with it? Is the cart before the horse? Are we, and so that's my question to you. I'm not saying what you say is wrong, Councillor Elliott, but so Councillor Palmer, do you have your hand up?
Yes, so we have the motion on the table. So speaking to the motion, I agree with Councillor Elliott's points there. And if I was able to put a motion to purchase a time machine and go back a couple of years and do it right, I would put that.
Would you use the restart funds to purchase your time machine?
Yeah.
So it's not free.
So we are where we are, and yeah, I share the frustration, but now we need to move on, I guess.
Okay. Any comments on the restart community grant policy, Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think through this whole process and being at this table through this pandemic has been an eye-opening experience. We've made the best decisions we could at the time, and at the time we asked our the committee we started, I'm blanking on the name. The Recovery Task Force, thank you. We asked the Recovery Task Force to come up with ideas of what did our community need. We did not give them a ton of direction because we wanted to get an honest answer from our community, from representatives of a wide variety of our community. The answer we got back was that this is what our community needs. I'm comfortable with that. I fully support this policy.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Councillor Elliott's opposed. Balance of council's in favor. This is passed. Ms. Floyd, any questions from the press?
No, Your Worship, we haven't received any questions from the press.
Okay, I'd like a motion to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1 H, C, E, and G of the Community Charter. Councillor Ryan, Councillor Brooks Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We'll stop the live stream and